What's a real-life glitch you've experienced that you still can't explain? Story 1. I dreamt I was on a train that crashed. The guy in front of me was decapitated, and the train car caught on fire before plunging off a bridge into the water. I drowned, woke up in a panic, realized I wasn't dead, and fell back asleep. Had the exact same dream, and again and again. The next day, dragging my tired butt into work, wondering why my mind decided to play a dream like a bad VCR. I passed the volunteer desk at work with its daily pile of newspapers. The evening before, a train had crashed before plunging off a bridge into a river. Later, it came out the crash produced some horrific injuries, including decapitation. Story 2. I'm not the kind of person to have a great many friends, but those friends I do keep are sacred to me. So one evening, I was getting out of a Rotterdam subway to go to my apartment near there, when I see an old friend, one I haven't seen in the flesh in a few years, heading into the subway. I call out his name, and he turns, waves, and makes this "call me" gesture. Then the doors close, and the subway rides off. 30 seconds later, my phone rings. It was my friend, who told me he'd just seen me get on the normal train he'd used to get home from the bar. Apparently, I had grinned, waved, gestured, "call me," the door shut, and the train drove off. I lived in Rotterdam, he lived in Amsterdam. That's just over 200 kilometers apart, or about 125 miles. Story 3. This happened about 6 years ago. I and 3 other friends went to a concert at the biggest venue in Mexico City. One of my friends is a woman, that is important for the story, so the concert ended and we agreed on a meetup point outside the venue so we could pick a cab and leave together. There were about 100,000 people there, so we inevitably got separated. So we went to the meetup point. We waited for my friend for about 15 minutes when we started to get worried, so we start calling her phone. However, due to the sheer amount of people present at the venue trying to make phone calls, the lines get congested and the calls won't go out or they won't be received, so we started to get really worried. After another 10 minutes of trying to call her, I get a phone call from her. She sounded extremely gloomy and sad. She said, "Hey Sebastian, I'm alright. I'm already at my place. Everything's okay." I got immediately freaked out as this was impossible. She lived 2 hours away and not even an hour had gone by. We got super freaked out and tried to call her and start flagging some cops down, because being Mexico City, I thought she'd been kidnapped. Then 30 seconds after the call, she comes out of the crowd looking as chilled as she could possibly look. I yell at her, telling her what the hell was wrong with her, etc, etc. The thing is, she looked so surprised at this. She denied having made any phone calls. She tried but couldn't get a signal. We don't believe her, so we look at her phone and there was no record of the call having been made. After this, I take my phone to show her the call and there was no record of the call having been received either. To this day, I have no idea what happened, because the voice on the other end of the phone was hers, and she knew the details about me and my name. Story 4. In high school, I did archery, and one day at shooting practice, one of the new kids shot a bullseye exactly, dead center. This isn't that remarkable. You fire enough arrows, sooner or later one of them will be a bullseye. But everyone was being nice and congratulating him. Suddenly, a voice in my head, which sounded like me, but didn't feel like me, said, "Yeah, but Lynn's about to do the same thing." I could see in my mind's eye Lynn firing an arrow, it flying through the air and hitting a dead center bullseye. Then maybe 3 or 4 seconds later, I watch as Lynn fires an arrow, and it flies in exactly the trajectory I had seen in my head, and lands with a thwack. Bullseye. Everyone is over-congratulating Lynn now. She was new too, and I'm standing off to the side wondering what the fuck just happened. It happened one more time a month or 2 later too. I saw something happen in my head exactly as it did a few seconds later. I've forgotten the details of the second time though, and it's never happened since. Story 5. My mom told me this. My parents' bedroom was this really large master closet. It was technically just one closet, but it had 2 doors going into it. Between the 2 doors were a high shelf and a hanging rod for clothes, so it functioned like 2 separate walk-in closets, but you could walk from one to the other by ducking under any clothes hung in the middle. One night she was in her side of the closet and she saw through the gap between the shelf and the clothes rod my dad walk into his side of the closet. She heard the metal coat hanger sliding as he looked for something to wear and saw the clothes in the middle sway as they were brushed from the other side. From her side of the closet, she started talking to him about something random. Then she heard the bathroom door open. She poked her head out of the closet to see my dad clearly just emerging from the shower. Walked to look into his side of the closet, and nothing. And up until the moment she poked her head out to look at the bathroom door, she will swear to you she could still see my dad in that closet. Story 6. I forgot about this until I read this post, but it's something I still don't understand. It was summer, and my grandfather, grandmother, mom, and I were working in the garden. It's pretty big and there's a lot of grass to be mowed and stuff like that. After all the work, my mom would always ask me to get some soda because everyone was thirsty from working. It was in the evening, but still pretty warm. After everyone had their soda, my mom asked me to put it back in the fridge, which was in the basement, used as a living area, only a small part in storage. So I go to the basement, and please note, the room with the fridge is still like 20 to 30 seconds from the exit, and you have to pass 2 doors with those flappy anti-fly curtains. I put the soda in the fridge, close the fridge, and walk out. Seems normal, right? Except I had to do this 3 times. The soda kept reappearing whenever I put it in the fridge and turned my back on it. Everyone was outside and there was only 1 bottle of soda in the room. To this day, I am still confused about what happened. There have probably been more moments like this, but this is the one I remember the most. Must have had a poor connection to the server. Story 7. One morning I woke up, rolled out of bed, brushed, had breakfast as usual, and then went about my day off. I lounged around the house a little bit and played my Nintendo DS for a bit, plinked away on my guitar. A lazy morning. Suddenly I'm driving in my car a couple of towns over on my way to the B&N. I pulled over and tried to collect my thoughts. I remembered waking up and getting ready, watering plants, cleaning my stuff up in the living room, then hopping in my car. But I also remember doing all of the stuff from that other version of that morning. So I had 2 separate days that suddenly merged into one and kept both memories. Story 8. When I was about 13 or 14, I went on a trip to another state with my church youth group. We drove through the country for hours in a region I had never been to before. Eventually, we ended up in a small town. I was looking out the window and I realized I knew this town as if I had lived there before. Like, I knew the post office would be a few blocks ahead on the right, and then sure enough, there it was. Weirder, I knew what the buildings would look like. I predicted the locations of all the landmarks in the town before we were close enough to see them, and all of the predictions were correct. It was very spooky and got the other kids in the bus a little riled up. Story 9. When I was young, maybe 7, after my mom got a divorce from my dad, we lived in this creepy apartment. I think kids have a sense of creepy shit, and I think I knew from the start that something was off about this apartment. A little backstory, and probably part of why it always creeped me out. My mom got a really good deal on it because she agreed to fix it up a little. Nothing crazy, just basically cleaning out the stuff the old tenant had left and slapping some fresh paint on the walls. The previous tenant had vanished one day. The owner said that rent time came and went and the tenant never paid. So after calling numerous times, they finally went into the apartment. The tenant was gone, but left all of their stuff. So the way this apartment was set up, when you entered the front door, a stairway was immediately to your left, a door to a bedroom immediately to your right, and then straight ahead was a hallway with an open living room and kitchen at the end. So if you're standing in the doorway, you can see into the bedroom, up the stairs, and into the living room. Once you enter the living room, you can see the full kitchen. One day I was playing a computer game in the downstairs bedroom and started to get hungry. I walked out of the bedroom, calling for my mom as I walked down the hallway. No answer. When I rounded the corner into the kitchen, she wasn't there. I went back down the hallway and started up the stairs, but as I was about halfway up, I felt a really creepy feeling and decided to go back down the stairs, all the while still calling for her. At the bottom of the stairs, I opened the front door and called for her with no response. Went back down the hall to open the sliding glass back door. This was an apartment complex, so we had no backyard, just a little deck. Nothing. Panicking, I went back down the hall toward the original bedroom I was in, trying to figure out what to do. I decided to grab the phone to call someone, walked back down the hall to get it, and there stands my mother, cooking dinner in the kitchen. When I asked her where she'd been, she said she'd been there the whole time. I didn't ask why she didn't answer when I was calling for her or if she saw me opening the back door, and she said no. It's been probably about 15 or so years and I still think about this incident periodically. That apartment was creepy as fuck. Like, the day we moved out, we found this hidden room type thing disguised by a vent cover that we'd never seen in there 2 years we lived there. I had recurring nightmares of the same man. And there were a few times our front door either wouldn't lock or we'd get up in the morning to it standing open. So glad we didn't live there for longer than we had to. Story 10. When I was about 11 years old, I was playing with my younger sister and 2 friends at the bottom of their garden. It was a semi-rural area and there was a cow field that stretched away for about a mile and then there was a motorway. There was no visual change in our surroundings, yet suddenly the cows stopped making any sound at all and we couldn't hear the traffic in the motorway, which was usually constant. We all froze as we sensed something. The air felt heavy, as if it was pushing down on us, and we all felt prickly heat in any exposed skin. It lasted a good 10 seconds and then stopped as fast as it had started. The cows went crazy and the traffic sounds returned. We all agreed we felt it. I wonder what strange weather systems were at play that day. Story 11. Once in college, some friends and I drove out of the city and down a country road in a secluded area, so we could smoke pot and cruise around. Didn't really have a secure place to smoke near campus, and we were dumb enough to think it was safer in a moving vehicle. So after nightfall, we are on our way headed back to town, and it seems out of nowhere we are in this massive traffic jam on this country road. There are tons of cars in front of us and even cars trying to pass on the shoulder. Cars were racing past going the other way, which really didn't lead anywhere. There just seemed to be a kind of pandemonium, like we were driving around a sports stadium after a game. There were no lights from a police car or fire truck, no evidence of a crash, nothing. We were literally screaming because it was so weird. It all came out of nowhere. It was a 2-lane road that didn't lead anywhere, yet there were tons of cars jammed up. Then it just seemed like all the cars were gone. The traffic let up and we were cruising along again. But I don't remember seeing cars in front of us or behind us anymore. It was like we were alone on the road. We lost it and couldn't stop talking about it for like a week. I'd like to say it was a glitch, but it's probably because we were smoking some good stuff. Story 12. Story. One day I was driving with my son, 3, and daughter, infant. Son was in a car seat all the way in the back of my van. The daughter was in the middle. I know my son had boots on because there was no snow on the ground, so I tried to put his shoes on and he screamed bloody murder until he got boots. We went directly to the van. When we got to our destination, a grocery store less than 10 minutes away, he no longer had boots on. Now keep in mind that the windows in the back of my van don't open at all. Neither do the windows in the middle. Only the ones in the front, and since it was winter, I definitely didn't open those. After a quick search in the parking lot with no results, we obviously had to go back home, because he couldn't walk around the store in socks. When we got back home, I searched the car properly. After about 20 minutes, it wasn't even about getting to the grocery store. It was the principle of the thing. I was going to find those goddamn boots. I removed the car seats and entire seats from the van. I searched every possible space I could access, let alone my strapped-in 3-year-old. I even searched everywhere between the spot I put his boots on and the car. I never found those goddamn boots. Story 13. A friend of mine and I used to joke about how our backpacks had black holes, which were why we could put all our stuff in them. A good while into this, we found each other's stuff in our backpacks. This happened multiple times too. After it kept happening, we reasoned that it was most likely that we were dropping our stuff into the other's backpack without noticing. But the chances of that were lower than the frequency at which it was happening. What really screamed at me that something was wrong was when 3 of his pens and his pen collection ended up not in my backpack, but in the pocket of my jacket weeks after he lost them. I like to think that whenever we come to agree upon something, it'll happen, which is why I'm glad we both also joke about and discuss becoming gods in our plans when we do. Unfortunately, these occurrences have ceased lately, so I guess the magic is worn. Story 14. I had an abusive childhood. One time in middle school, I had a friend over, a very rare occurrence for me. My friend and I were about to enter the house and go up to my room. Now the door we were going through connected to the laundry room, which has the washer and dryer like right in front of the door. So if you're doing laundry, sometimes the door will hit you. I had a premonition, nothing else to call it. I put my hand on the door handle and a premonition of the exact words and way my stepmother would scream at me the moment I opened the door. I turned to my friend and said, "When I open this door, my mom will be there, and she will be very upset." It looked super confused, but sure enough, I opened the door and she yelled and screamed at me exactly the way I saw. Then we both ran up to my room. I don't believe in the supernatural or religion, the occult, ghosts, or anything like that at all. But anytime I start to get 100% atheistic neckbeard in my own head, I remember that and it makes me think. It's not bulletproof because she had yelled at me for that several times, but I'll never forget the absolute certainty I had at the moment of what exactly was about to happen. I've never been more certain of anything in my life since. Weirded my friend out too. Story 15. Went out of state to a casino with my family. The casino had 2 floors. It kind of looked like a mall. You could see the top floor just by looking up, and you got to the top floor by using an escalator. The bathroom was on the top floor and my mom went to the bathroom alone. She was gone for about 15 minutes before I went looking for her. I checked the restroom and she wasn't in there. The rest of my family, 5 people, spread out to look for her and met back by the escalator and no one could find her. I was holding her phone for her so I couldn't call her. I saw a suspicious-looking man standing by the ladies' room the entire time we were looking, and I thought maybe he killed her and stuffed her in the trash, or maybe he killed her in the men's room. I'm irrational when I'm in panic mode, so I checked there too. Finally, after another few minutes, my mom comes down the escalator looking zoned out. I was so relieved to see her. She was tripping out because she said she took the escalator and it took her to another building across the street, and then back to where we were even though she got on the right escalator. I swear, there were only 2, one going up and another going down. The crazy part was that the buildings weren't even connected at all. Story 16. We'll never understand this for as long as I live. In high school, I liked to wake up early in the morning so I'd have time to eat breakfast, watch TV, maybe do some last-minute homework and relax before I begin my day. I always set my alarm for 6 a.m. So that morning, as my usual phone alarm went off, I grabbed my phone to turn it off. I distinctly remember reading a text message from a friend who was an early riser like me, asking me, did I want to grab fried rice later that night with the rest of our friends? He sent this at 5:39 a.m. It was still September, so the sun was always up at this hour. I got out of bed and immediately hopped in the shower. When I got out, I headed down to the kitchen to brew coffee and make some breakfast. While I was waiting on the coffee pot to heat up, I ran back to my room to grab my phone. When I looked down at my phone, I just about croaked. The time on the phone read 3:30 a.m. To make matters worse, I looked outside and the sun wasn't even up yet. What's even weirder was I never had even received that text from my friend. I just sat there bewildered and frustrated, running through the chain of events from that morning over and over again. I eventually made my way back to the kitchen. Seeing that I was wide awake now, I didn't need coffee anymore. I stayed up the rest of the morning, not even trying to attempt to sleep again. Later that morning, something even stranger happened. At 5:39 a.m., I received a text message from my friend. I spent a lot of time over the years trying to decipher the events from that morning. All I know is that somehow I woke up in the future and my shower took me back to the present. Can anyone relate to this? Story 17. I used to have these very vivid dreams that were all part of an overall story. They took place in an alternate universe with magic and demons and shit. Myself and some friends, these people weren't real, mind you, were freedom fighters in the war. The dreams were never in order and I wrote them down after waking up, figuring out where they were placed in the timeline by taking note of particular details. For instance, in some of the dreams I was always alone and was incredibly powerful. In others, I was pretty much just an average kid and had all those friends around me as we snuck around trying to rescue POWs. One night I had a particularly dark dream where one of my friends, his name was Luke, was sitting on a rooftop threatening to jump. I went up there to try to talk him out of it, and we ended up having a long conversation about how he couldn't see the point in fighting anymore, now that she's dead. So this was pretty surprising. The she that was being referred to was his girlfriend Maddie. In the later dreams in the timeline, she was never there, so this sort of explained why she disappeared from the dreams. That was during the Christmas break in 2009. When school started in 2010, I met Maddie for the first time when she started at my school. She looked exactly the same, had the same laugh, the same mannerisms, and everything. I definitely had never met her before, and yet there she was. Not just alive, but actually f***ing real. Story 18. I have two. One time, both me and my sister were sitting in my living room, and then all of a sudden, she just freezes and asks me if she sees that black thing on the street. I said no, and then I blinked, and it was an experience I never want to feel again. The TV went silent. Everything around me went silent, and all I could hear was my sister yelling that he was coming closer. I looked back on the street, and sure enough, there was a shadowy person walking towards us. Then everything stopped and went back to normal. One time I was at work just counting money. We were required to listen to the local AM radio station, which plays country music mostly and Twins games when they were on. I was counting money, and all of a sudden, Don't Worry, Be Happy starts playing. I like the song, so I start jamming to it while counting money. Then it plays again. I start getting a little skeptical, but I roll with it. Then it plays again and again. I contact one of my friends who works at the radio station and was like, what the f***? He was working at the time. He controls what gets played, and he said that's not even on their playlist.
What is the creepiest glitch in the Matrix you've experienced? Story 1. Not creepy, but so vivid and distinct that I still think about it, years later. I had a subjectively long, involved dream where I was a vendor in a fish market. I remember getting up early, dressing, doing a whole morning routine, going to get tea, heading out to the docks, buying fish, loading them in a cart and going to get ice, then haggling for ice, buying some less fresh fish while I was at it, then going to a market to my stall, setting up and selling fish all day. It was so real. I talked to friends, smoked nasty cigarettes, haggled with customers, ate lunch, had tea, and just lived through the day. At the end of the day, I cleaned up, counted my cash, paid the stall rent, went home, cooked some of the fish I hadn't sold, sling with some veggies and rice that I traded for. I drank more tea, relaxed for a while, then drew a hot bath, soaked and smoked some more cigs, then went to bed. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, ready to go down to the docks to buy a fresh catch, except I was in my house, next to my wife. Truck parked outside and it was Saturday, no work. My wife and I were getting geared up to go skiing in Oregon, and the car was already packed. The weird thing was, in the dream I was single, and a smoker. I'm not. And the whole long dream had been in fluent Chinese, the effortless kind of fluency that only comes from a lifetime of speaking it. Oh, and I had been Chinese. I'm a big, hairy white dude, somewhat fluent in Spanish, and I know a little bit of Russian, but I've never. It was just weird. I've never worked in a fish market. I wonder who I was. I wonder what that was. Meanwhile, in China, a Chinese fish vendor woke up after having a dream about him being a big, hairy white dude with a wife in a truck. Story 2. 10 years ago, I was returning from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later, we came around a bend. It was full moon, and we could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that, the road was completely empty. Suddenly, everything went completely dark in the car. No lights from the dash or gauges or headlights in the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about 1/4 of a mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it just had a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided that the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I am missing an hour of my life, and to this day have no idea how it happened.
You're a wizard, Harry, but your superpower is teleportation and you need to learn how to master it.
Story 3. When I was a teenager, I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seal's "Don't Cry" to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real-life friend's dead body floating in their bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged online that evening, and the friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her, and she said no. I remember thinking that it meant something like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang, and it was a real-life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked at this point, but talked to her normally. She was just talking about school and shit, up until I realized I heard a splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes, I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away, and then after a very long pause, she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared waiting for it to hit her, so she called me so she'd hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there, she was unconscious but alive. Today, she's a mom to a beautiful little girl, and she's okay. Story 4. I have a sleep tracking app on my phone that has a setting for lucid dreaming. It will start saying, "You are dreaming," repeatedly in a woman's voice with a bit of an echo. I was at work one day when I started hearing the voice randomly every few minutes or so. I checked my phone, and as soon as the screen turned, I woke up in my bed as the sun was rising. A bit freaked out, I went to take a shower. Then on my way to work, I started to hear the voice again through the radio. When I turned my car off, a bit freaked out again, I once more woke up in my bed as the sun was rising. This happened about 3 or 4 more times, all at different times of the day. I didn't trust reality for about a week after that, and still refused to use that particular setting of the app. You should start using a reality check. Mine is to pinch my nose and attempt to breathe through it. If I can't breathe, it's reality. If I can breathe, it's a dream. The downside to this one is that it looks silly, so my subconscious likes to stick me in situations where I'd be embarrassed to do it. Others that I've heard of: check a clock, look away and check again. If it's a dream, the time will change. Attempt to read something. You'll find it between difficult and impossible. Flip a light switch. Light switches tend not to work in dreams. It's like the brain has difficulty re-rendering the scene with a lighting change. Edit. To aggregate the replies I've received, the effectiveness of the clock, reading, and light switch tricks seem to vary greatly from person to person. A lot of people have suggested attempting to put the finger of one hand through the palm of the other. In the dream, it should pass through. A lot of people have suggested attempting to count and recount your fingers. You should come up with an incorrect number. Others have suggested looking into a mirror. You should appear distorted. Edit 2. The new consensus from replies I'm getting is that looking in a mirror in a dream is a bad idea. Apparently you see some terrifying stuff, especially if the reflection has something to say to you. Story 5. Oh boy, you guys would love where I work. Weird things happen here all the time, but I'll just talk about one of the creepiest moments I've experienced here. I work as a security and nighttime attendant at an apartment building. It's 24 stories and one of the oldest buildings in the city. One night I'm sitting here when the phone rings at about 3 a.m., and I answer, "Hello, this is Draven at the front desk. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounded female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person I couldn't understand them and asked what apartment they were in, but again, garbled response and 23rd floor. After the third time of trying to understand them in the same response, I said I couldn't understand them and I'd come up and to meet me in the hallway. So I go to the main elevators, and both are up on the, surprise, 23rd floor. Luckily, we have an older service elevator, and it's only on the 7th floor, so I call it down. I get it and hit the button for the 23rd floor, but it won't move, and the inner door won't close. So I go to unlock the reset panel, and boom, we start going up. Door still open. I'm freaking out. The elevator is shaking because it goes pretty fast and is old. As I'm going up, I just stay towards the back and finally reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's nobody around. I walk along slowly, trying to listen for anyone awake who might have called, but there's nothing. So now I head to the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are, and when I get to them, they're just sitting there with their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew it could be just the elevators on the fritz. So I get in and figured I'll just reset them when I get to floor 1 when I hear the sound of the back stairwell closing. So I quickly get out and go to the stairwell, and lo and behold, no one's there. But the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar, and at that time, I'm the only one in the building with a key. The top of the building is a large machine room housing all the really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't like going into it because it's creepy as and no one ever goes there, so at this point I'm seriously freaked out, but I muster up and head in. I shout, "Hello?" There's no response. The lights in the room flicker because they're fluorescent, so I can't see well either, but at the end of the room I can make out the roof access door, and sure as it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forward, checking the space in between each machine as I walk by. There's no one there, so I open the roof access door. I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there's a slight wraparound, and if there was a jumper or something, I needed to be sure, so I step out and leave the door ajar like it was. Almost immediately, the door is pulled shut. Now, I might have written it off as wind or something, but this door is hard to shut and hard to open. Really hard. I immediately grab the handle and yank it open, slam it behind me, and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too and go back to the 23rd floor hallway. Get into an elevator, door still open, and go all the way down to the 1st floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up, don't say a word, and sure as hell, garbled voice again, only audibly saying 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned the ringer off, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. There's been a bunch of creepy things happening at this building. It's basically like the Overlook Hotel at night. I walked past the dark room here on the 1st floor once, and I swore I saw myself standing inside it. The next night, as I'm inside said room cleaning, the lights flip off and I turn around to see a quick flash of myself walking past. Oh man, I could not cope with that. I think I'd just vomit everywhere and quit, and then quit again just to be safe. Story 6. This happened back in college. I was driving home from my cabin in northern Wisconsin through the Indian reservation. There was a man on the side of the road sort of limping along, and I pulled over and asked if he was okay. He said yes, he was fine. He just needed to get home because his wife decided she still loved him. They'd had a fight. I asked the man where home was, and surprisingly, it was the same city where I went to college, about 2 hours away. I offered him a ride. He didn't talk much. He was tired. When we got into town, he started giving me directions. "Just down there, it's close," he said. "Take a left at the lights." "Okay," I said. "Right here," he said, pointing. "After the white truck." "Here?" I pulled into the driveway. "Yes." "Shut up," I said. "What?" he asked. He was grinning like he knew what I was going to say next. "I used to live here," I told him. "You don't say." "Yes, upstairs, apartment number 3. "Yeah, that's ours." Now he was smiling ear to ear. "Small world," he said. He thanked me for the ride and got out of my car and walked through the front door of my old apartment building. I know it was just a coincidence, but it was one of the strangest moments of my life. Story 7. I was heading home with my dad. We stopped at a drive-thru. I start feeling more and more anxious for no reason, to the point where it makes me lightheaded and sick to my stomach. We have to wait a little bit ahead because they gave us the wrong order, so I sit there feeling like shit, and it suddenly comes to me an urge to call my brother. He was trying to call us. He was in a car accident. No one died, some got seriously bruised. He was only shaken. I told him to shut up and get as far away from the car as possible. He didn't understand but followed through, trying to call some of his buddies, and I could hear them calling him a wuss. Him giving up and getting far, and then a loud noise. People shouting. After the whole shit was over, he told me what happened. His drunk friend tried to impress some girls in the car, hit the gas, drifted, and hit the bottom of the car on some rocks, completely fucking with the engine. They stood near the car, the driver still inside trying to turn the engine back on. The hood burst into flames and the car started to burn fast. The driver managed to get away but got severely hurt. Some of the guys and girls who stood around were hurt and burned too, but not as bad as the driver. My brother was the only one with light bruises from the whole thing. He told me that when I ordered him to get away from the car, he was in front of it, inches from the hood. I never experienced anything like this before, and after, just this once. It's just a fucking weird memory. I don't remember what I was thinking. I remember it like watching a movie and seeing myself and everything from an outside angle. Story 8. I have a few, but this one stands out. I was catching a SkyTrain in one particular city about 15 minutes from where I get off. While I wait, there's a woman with glazed eyes asking people for money. She came up to me, stopped briefly, and asked, "Excuse me, could you spare some money? My brother's in the hospital and I'd like some money to buy him some flowers." That's rich, I thought. Drug addicts are getting more and more obvious with their lines. "Here's $5. Gave it to her without even looking her in the face, convinced of her intentions. Anyways, my train pulls up and I get on. I look through the glass at her walking around and asking others for money as the train pulls away. The train arrives at the station 15 minutes later, and I walk down and out to the bus stop. There's only one bus in the direction I'm going, and just my luck, it is there waiting when I get off the train. So on the bus, I hop and wait for the bus driver to finish reading his paper before the doors close and we embark down the highway. After about 5 to 10 minutes of traveling, the driver pulls over for a routine stop. The doors open, and to my complete astonishment, the woman from the SkyTrain walks into the bus, a dozen roses in hand. She looks me right in the eyes as she walks past to take her seat. How in the blue hell did she get there? I took the train before her. I watched her at the train stop from inside as we pull away. I went over a river. I caught the first and only bus going in this particular direction. And not only did she beat me there, she had the time to go to a store and buy a dozen roses. To this day, I have no idea how this happened. Story 9. It happened in early 2000 when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. This one night, when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "I work tonight." And he said, "But they said you called in a few hours ago saying that you were sick." I was a bit confused and said, "It must have been someone else and they got the message wrong." After everyone else showed up for work that night, it was a bit weirder, but we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones, and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said that I had called at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while out cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before and it was a bit bad, but not anything that I had to go out to clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside work and we started talking about it and how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it while he was still sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, a man picked up the phone and with a raspy voice said, "Hello?" I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I dialed the right number, and I had. After a few seconds, the person said, "Hello?" Again in the same raspy voice. I said, "Hello? Who's this?" "This is Taylor. Who's this?" the person said. My heart started spinning because my name is Taylor also. I said in almost a scream, "Where's Ann?" He said, "Ann's in bed. Who is this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home, and I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say hello, followed soon after by "what the fuck" rather loudly. I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door and my wife was sitting watching TV and was shocked at me being home. I asked her who was there and she said no one has been here. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the prison to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work and when I came in, Dave was acting weird and asked me, "How the hell are you doing this?" He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone and the person on the other end sounded like me. He kind of freaked out and hung up the phone. A minute later, as he could see my car leaving the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the fuck was going on. He said that I was a bit irate and said I was sick and did not feel like playing these games and was telling him to stop prank calling me and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I found out that the phone line from my area had been knocked down the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. Well, this means that a Taylor in some alternate universe got through you and then got fired for not calling in sick. Poor alternate reality, Taylor. Story 10. This happened when I was 11. I still remember it like it was yesterday. My grandfather was getting old and had been in and out of the hospital a few times that year. At that moment, he had been in the hospital for probably 2 days. We had gone into the hospital to visit him where I gave him a big hug and told him I loved him and would see him tomorrow. That night, I went to bed and had the most beautiful dream. My grandpa came into my room and sat in the rocking chair in the corner. He invited me into his lap and told me he was going away for a while, that someday he would see me again. I shouldn't worry, because everything was okay and he wasn't in any pain. I smiled at him and gave him a big hug and told him I understood. I then looked over at my brother sleeping in the bunk below me and asked my grandpa if we should wake him up and tell him. When I turned back around to get a response from my grandpa, he was gone. I ran to the window to look out into the front yard. There he was, waving at me. He whispered, "Go tell your mom and dad exactly what I told you." I looked back at the door to my room and then back to the front yard, and he was gone. I immediately woke up, ran to my parents' room, and turned on the light. I told them exactly what Grandpa had told me. They told me it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I told them again exactly what Grandpa told me. Again, frustrated, it was 2 a.m., told me to go to bed, and we would talk about it in the morning. Just then the phone rang. It was the hospital. My mother started sobbing. Grandpa had passed. At that moment, she just sat there with my father staring at me. I still remember their faces. They both looked at each other, then me, then each other, and finally smiled and stopped crying. They gave me a big hug and told me they loved me and to go back to bed. They ended up going to the hospital that night, and my aunt came over to watch us. But we have never talked about that night since. In fact, I don't think I've ever written about it, which explains the tears rolling down my cheeks right now. Wow, that was liberating. And I'm glad other people have had these types of things happen too. Story 11. During a spinal tap procedure, I was put under. While under the anesthetics, I had what I can only explain as an out-of-body experience, seeing as how my viewpoint was from above my body looking down on the procedure. I watched the whole thing and saw that the doctor knocked my Game Boy off the tabletop while walking by, batteries ejecting from the fall. One fell in sight and he picked it up, but the other was next to the front left wheel under the bed out of his view, but not mine. I woke up groggy and told him where my other battery was, and he was shocked when he found it there. To this day, it still weirds me out. To clarify, my face was facing a wall that was touching the bed. In my possible field of vision, I would have seen the surface of the bed and the wall, but nothing else. Story 12. I used to live in North Carolina a few years ago, and still regularly go back to visit friends. While I was there, my friends and I, who are now in college or are graduated, ran into somebody who we had known, although I didn't know her very well, back in high school. A few days later, I flew back home to Texas. The next day, I went to the grocery store and I was walking down the aisle when I see a girl that looks exactly the same. I did the biggest double take I've ever done. Being 1,400 miles away from the city where I knew the girl lived, it seemed absolutely impossible. As it turns out, after I called my friends about it, the girl I had been talking to in North Carolina had an identical twin in Texas who just happens to live in the same city as me. For a couple of hours, I thought I was crazy, though. Story 13. When I was like 10 or 11, I was going to the beach with my aunt and her friends. There were 2 cars of us. To get there, we had to go through a very large industrial area. We didn't know the direction, so our car was following the other. Suddenly, they did an unexpected turn, and so our driver had to take a sharp bend. In that moment, we heard a very clear, loud voice inside the car, saying, laughing, "Sharp bend, The driver immediately hit the brakes. We looked at each other, puzzled. We all recognized it as a voice not belonging to any of us. At the very same time, we noticed that the other car stopped as well. The other driver got out of the car with a scared face and shouted to us, Did you hear that as well?" They heard the very same thing inside their car. The area around was fully deserted. Edit. A little bit of background. This happened in central Italy in the early 90s. My aunt used to act at the time, and most of the other guys were theater actors. The voice scared the shit out of us because it was very clear, near, but not coming from a direction within the car you could distinguish, nor front nor rear. Inside the car, but from no distinct place. It was like mocking us. We were scared, but soon someone started to say, "Hey, who of you did..." Remember, those were comedy actors who used to do any sort of strange voice. This was still we noticed the other car stopping and saw the look of the other guy driving that car. They all were as scared as us and told us, "We heard this scary voice inside our car," and told us the very same words we just heard. We were there on a hot day under the sun in an area with large streets and absolutely nothing and no one around us. No cars, no people, no buildings. We never figured out what happened. Story 14. As I type this, I'm already feeling deja vu. I've always wanted to share this part of my life with someone, but I've never been able to. So I'll just tell a bunch of people on the internet. One day I was walking to work and all of a sudden had an urge to walk a different path than usual. I work downtown in a big city. It was a strange spur-of-the-moment urge to walk a different way that changed my life forever. It turned into an alley I had never seen before. As I remember it, I made it about 15 feet or so when an actual glitch happened. Everything in my mind scrambled. I felt like I didn't have a body anymore, just that I was a semi-conscious entity floating through some weird dimension. All of a sudden, in the array of different colors and shapes, a vision came to me. It was a bunch of strange-looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits. They looked startled and panicked that I could see them. One of the people made a quick movement and everything turned to black. When I regained normality, I was on a completely different street. It was the same street that I always used to walk to work. I felt sick and severely disturbed and depressed. I've never done any hard drugs, never experienced any hallucinations, never had anything like this happen to me. The weird thing is, when the glitch was correcting itself, I could see those people watching me like a caged animal. I had the feeling that I knew I was being controlled. It still bothers me very much to this day. Story 15. About a year ago, I had a terrible nightmare. It started off with me waking up in bed during a thunderstorm. As the room illuminated again and again from the flashes of lightning outside, I realized that the bed I was laying in wasn't mine. The head of the bed was against the wall the door was located on, and from my perspective, I couldn't tell if it was open or closed. That is, until I saw the face. At first, just the nose and jaw broke past the door frame, but then an entire face slowly passed through the doorway. I tried to yell, "Who the f*** are you? Where the f*** am I?" But it felt like I had lost my voice. No matter how hard I tried to scream, nothing came out, and this person continued to enter the room, looking dead ahead away from me. Then just as the person was completely into the room, their head snapped towards me, and it locked eyes with mine. I tried to get out of the bed, but felt completely paralyzed. The person started making their way to me, but with every step, their body contorted in ways that would break a normal person's bones. Their neck snapped so the back of their head touched their back. Their jaw laid flat in their chest, and their arms had broken at the shoulders and migrated to the back like wings. Just terrifying shit. And just before they reached me, I woke up. The next day, I told my mom about it and went into great detail about the room. Turns out it was almost an exact copy of my room when I was a baby. We moved out of that house when I was super young, like I have no idea what the insides to any room look like. Just kinda weird, I guess. Edit. So I guess I have sleep paralysis. Cool. Story 16. Too many. I'll list a few. 1. One day while standing in the living room of a house I'd rented with my friends, I heard my roommate bound down the stairs as he usually did and run into the kitchen, slide across the floor and open the fridge. Being young then too, I turned around to face the open kitchen to tell him to quit running like a little kid in the house and was looking at an empty kitchen. A second later, he bounded down the stairs, ran into the kitchen, slid across the floor and opened the fridge. When he turned around, he said, "Whoa, what the f*** is wrong?" Because it must have been pale as a sheet. Number 2. When I was a child, I had a record player. Yes, I'm old, and I used to listen to Kiss. Yes, I'm old, and I was a lame kid. Anyway, as kids' poorly handled records tended to go, my favorite album developed scratches that caused the needle to skip here or there. One of the songs always had a skip in the same spot, and I got used to it. Fast forward to a year ago, out of nostalgia, I bought and downloaded the song from Amazon, wanting to walk down memory lane. I was listening to it with a friend, and then the song skipped, in the same spot. My friend heard it as well. I know she did because when I heard it, I went berserk and demanded she tell me what she heard, if anything at all, to check my own sanity. She heard it. I replayed it. The skip was gone. Number 3. I have on several occasions dreamt of a person, place, or event that, within a month, plays out in front of me precisely as I had dreamt. Number 4. I went to college in California at USC, but the summer before my first semester, I did an enrichment program in England at Oxford University. However, before I left, USC held an East Coast orientation for freshmen. I was from New York, and I attended. While there, I made a friend whom I'd continue to be friends with once school began. Anyway, after orientation, I attended the program in England. While there, I made a lot of awesome friends, and got very close, platonically, to this one great girl. We had a blast. Upon returning to the States and settling in at USC, I reconnected with the guy I had met at orientation. I couldn't believe my luck as I just stumbled upon him while he blabbed on a payphone. Yes, I told you I'm old. Which was great, because I had no idea if I'd ever find him, and that day campus was just crawling with students. He put whomever he was talking to on hold and made quick, "Hey, how are you?" small talk, promising to chat as soon as he was done with his long-distance call. I waited as he explained how a friend he'd made at orientation, me, had just found him randomly and how weird and cool that was. Then he said my name. Then he made a face. Then he asked my last name and, once I told him, he repeated it. Then he made another face. Then he asked me if I knew Rose. Last name withheld for this story. And I stuttered, "Yes." He asked, "You met in England?" I was sort of stunned now. Yes, this was the friend I'd made there, probably my best friend there. He just handed me the phone. "She's my girlfriend. Here, she wants to say hello." Way too many coincidences there for comfort. Number 5. I'm one of those people. I'm someone who, for more than 20 years now, see uncomfortably frequent instances of 11/11. Yes, I have since seen that it was a worldwide phenomenon affecting millions of people. Yes, I saw that they made some dumb horror movies about it. Yes, most if not all the theories about what it could mean are absurd and I believe none of them. Now, the first logical response, which was also mine, was to assume that for whatever reason, I'm subconsciously prompting myself, based on my own inner clock, to look at the clock at 11:11. And that sat well with me. For a while. Then other things happened. I found an old wristwatch of mine in a box in my closet full of life detritus. The watch's batteries had run out and it was stopped at exactly 11:11:11. I sat with a friend in Denny's at midnight and finally revealed this oddity of my life to him, which obviously only elicited smirks. He never left the table after I told him and we were alone. I even made sure not to tell him in front of a waiter, lest they do too think I was nuts. At meal's end, he had to use the restroom and I had already paid, so I went with him to the bathroom hallway and stopped dead in my tracks, grabbing his coat so he couldn't continue. I just pointed to the wall, which had graffiti all over it. Only 11:11, written in Sharpie everywhere. A few months ago, I cleared boxes of junk out of an old office of mine before selling it. In one box was a wall alarm clock I had bought that surely had to be out of batteries by now, I thought, and then remembered the wristwatch. I thought to myself, if I pull this clock out and it says 11:11, then nothing is real. I pulled it out and the time was blinking. 11:11. I actually yelled, "What the f***?" With that, the alarm went off, startling me, and the time just went blank. The batteries were now dead, and it did not work at all anymore. So what does it mean? Are we in the Matrix? Is this a dream within a dream? I have no f***ing clue. Enough incidents have occurred just like this over 20 years, and with witnesses to convince me that I am at least not insane. But what the f*** it could even mean is well beyond my ken. Anyway, you wanted to know, so there you are. Story 17. A little backstory. I was a total idealist back in high school, so when choosing a college, I chose to go somewhere that none of my friends were attending so that I could strike out on my own in a finding myself sort of way. Well, I ended up making a few really close friends during my first semester. I mean, these guys became like family to me in a matter of months. One day during winter break, one of those guys, my buddy Kimbo, had gone back home to visit friends and family, and on his return trip to our college, he hit a bad patch of ice, got into a car accident, and was killed. It hurt like a son of a bitch for a long time, and I still think about him all the time, but anyways, a few weeks after Kimbo's accident, me and the rest of the guys were getting back from a party off campus, and as we were standing outside our dorm building smoking a cig, I felt my phone vibrating. When I pulled it out, I saw that I was getting a call from Kimbo's phone. Dumbfounded, I showed my friends the phone quickly and then answered. When I picked it up, it went directly to his voicemail, which played the same message it always had. It never happened again and we never really talked about it, but for me, it was one of those someone's looking after me moments. I hadn't been doing very well after his death, but seeing his name show up on my cell phone screen one final time made me feel a whole lot better for a time and really helped me get out of the slump I was in. I have no idea how his phone could have possibly called me, and I doubt I ever will, but this was one glitch in the Matrix that I'll forever be thankful for. Rest in peace, Kim, but feel free to call again. Story 18. Setting. Acid trip when I was 25 or so at this really cool music festival called Rustler's Valley in the mountains in the east of South Africa. So at the time I was taking a fair amount of acid, really enjoying what it did to my mind, but not really enjoying the actual trips at all. Mentally, they were really hard work. I eventually figured out acid was not very good for me, personally. Anyway, early that night, going up, I was sitting somewhere, with someone, on the ground next to one of the stages. At some point, I became aware of someone standing in front of me, looking at me. For some reason, it gave me the most extreme chills, and I couldn't look directly at this person at all. I wanted to get up and leave, but somehow that just felt like a completely wrong thing to do. The person eventually walked away after what felt like a really long time. The night went its course after that, and like any old acid trip, turned out to be several successive trips between Hell and Valhalla. Much later, early morning hours, coming down, I walked around aimlessly and got to this spot next to one of the stages, where I spotted someone wearing the same jeans as I did. Which was kind of unlikely because I used to make my own jeans from very bright and busy curtain fabric in those days. As I got closer, I realized it was me, from earlier that night. I stopped in front of myself, trying to figure out what to do with this bombshell. Then noticed how uncomfortable I was making earlier me, and ended up just wandering off, completely freaked out. After that trip, I still took mushrooms quite often. They always agreed with me, but that was my last acid trip ever. Story 19. Me and my friend were at a Chinese restaurant, and we ordered a General Tso chicken dinner and a shrimp lo mein dish. When we sat down, we took out both boxes and set them on the table about 2 feet apart. My friend opens the first box and we see a shrimp lo mein dish. It has all the things in there: noodles, shrimp, fried rice. He closes the box and opens the other box. Inside that box is another shrimp lo mein dish. Shrimp, noodles, fried rice. Oh, I think. They must have mixed the order. I was just about to say this when my friend says out loud, "Looks like they made a mistake and gave us 2. as he opens up the first box again. Inside of it is a General Tso chicken dinner order. General Tso chicken, white rice, and an egg roll. He froze and looked at me. I looked back at him, and we sat in silence. It took us 5 or so minutes to collect ourselves. I have no idea what the f*** happened. Are you sure you weren't high as f*** and opened the same box twice? Then went back to the first one and were mind blown? Story 20. Was monkeying around on the handrails of a balcony on the 4th floor of my building and fell off, as 2 of my buddies watched in horror. I remember seeing the concrete floor approaching as I fell head first and thinking, oh f***, I'm going to break my wrist. Why my wrist? Dunno. My next recollection is seeing my buddies yelling from up there, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I look up, I say, "What happened?" They did not see me actually hit the floor, they just ran outside and saw me already standing looking up. Not a scratch, not a bruise, nothing hurt. I don't remember hitting the floor, standing up or anything. No memories exist for those 1 or 2 seconds. None of us ever understood what happened, but we all saw it and agree on what happened. Story 21. I had just turned 22 and my parents had sold their house and purchased a place out in the country. On the property, there was a big shed not far from the house that I decided to turn into my place. Now I felt kind of uncomfortable in the shed sometimes, but my dog kept me company, so it wasn't so bad. Anyway, I had been there for maybe 2 weeks, and one night I'm on the computer, my dog was asleep at my feet, and I need to pee so I get up and go outside to piss. It's a beautiful clear night and the stars were incredible. Next thing I hear, the shed door slam behind me. I turn immediately and try to open it, but it won't budge. And from inside the shed, I can hear my dog start to growl, quietly at first, then louder. Now he's barking, and I'm panicking trying to get the door open. I must mention that I'm 6'5" and well-built, play sports, etc., but even ramming my full weight into the door won't open it. And I'm really panicking now as my dog's barks turn into whines, then whimpering, then silence. With all my might I slam into the door and it flies open. The light is off inside now and it's pitch black. It won't turn back on and I'm in complete darkness. Can't see my dog anywhere and I stumble around trying to find a torch. Finally I find it and pick it up and turn on my torch and I wasn't prepared for what I'd see next. My dog had literally squashed itself into the furthest, darkest corner of the room, eyes closed and is shaking violently. I immediately moved towards him and as soon as I got within reach of him, he leapt at me into my arms and wouldn't move. I picked him up and I swear I've never ran so fast in my goddamn life. Never stepped foot in that shed ever again, and my dog wouldn't even go near that part of the property. I don't know what happened in that shed that night, but I'll never forget it. Story 22. About a year ago, my girlfriend and I went to eat dinner at Chipotle. It's in a smallish shopping area with a burger joint and pay-away neighboring the Chipotle. One of those kinds of upper-classy type shopping areas. We pulled into the parking lot in front of the establishments at around 5 p.m. on a Friday evening to find an empty parking lot. There were no tables outside. There were no cars in the parking spots, not a person in sight, and even the lights inside the buildings were off. Completely confused, I took the car in a sort of loop around the building in order to leave. The only thing of interest was a single fire truck parked alongside the building, headlights on, but no emergency lights, and no one in the truck. It struck us a little odd. Maybe a fire in the building? As we pull around the back side of the building and then finish looping around, we drive past the front facade of the building. Except for this time, every parking spot is full. Tables are outside, patrons at them, and food half-eaten. There's people walking around and the lights inside the buildings are all on, but the fire truck was gone. Mind you, it took less than 30 seconds to make a circle around the building. Easily one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. More adjustment bureau than Matrix glitchy. Story 23. I'm not really sure if this belongs here, but here we go. When I was 15, I was incredibly depressed and struggling with my OCD and anxiety. It got to the point that I decided to kill myself. I arranged everything, note, when, where, how, etc., and waited. I waited about a week until my parents went out to dinner. I attached a note to my door telling my parents not to come in and to just call the police. Got dressed in my nicest clothes, showered, did my hair, and put a side note in my shirt pocket. My father had a number of guns and I chose one of them to do the deed with, a Beretta 92 handgun or something like that. I went into my bedroom, turned on some music, and laid down in my bed. I put the barrel into my mouth, sang a few lines of Free Fallin' Through Tears, and pulled the trigger. Then I went into a third-person type thing where I was just watching myself. I saw myself laying dead in my bed, slumped over and bleeding everywhere. I watched myself lie in my own gore for what seemed like forever. Then suddenly it felt like all the wind got knocked out of me and I was back in my body. Click. The gun jammed. I just threw it into the ground and sobbed into my pillow for hours before cleaning up everything and going to sleep. I have no idea what happened that day, but I'm more grateful than you can imagine. After that, I really made an effort to turn my life around, and it did. It's scary thinking that I wouldn't be here right now if it worked. Story 24. I'm from Finland, and that's also where these things I'm about to describe to you happened. This was some years ago, pre-smartphone GPS era. It was at the end of summer. 2 friends and myself were on a camping trip way up in the north in Lapland. The mosquito season was over and the weather was cooling down in anticipation of the coming fall. The 3 of us had packed food and gear for a 10-day trek. The car we arrived in had been left at the parking lot for a visitor center. This happened within the premises of the Urho-Kekkonen National Park, a 985 square mile stretch of wilderness near the Russian border. The terrain there varies greatly, from treeless and semi-mountainous to dense forests of spruce and pine and dwarf birch. There are lots of swamps. Seeing reindeer is not uncommon, and some nights you might hear wolves in the distance. You can run into a bear or a wolverine in this place, but of course, normally they avoid people. We mostly camped in a tent, but some nights we used shelters and simple huts provided for travelers free of charge. The trip had lasted 5 days, and we were at the furthest of any kind of civilization we were going to be on that particular outing. Truly in the middle of nowhere. There really is nothing there. There are no villages, towns, or industry. The place is a national park after all. Seeing other hikers happen from time to time. You'd see some people in the distance maybe, but very rarely would you come face to face with anyone. So in the middle of our trip, we were camped in a small clearing, woodland extending around us for a considerable distance in all directions. It was already dark, we had eaten our evening meal, and all 3 of us were jammed in our only tent. It was a bit cramped, but we fit. We took turns carrying it during the hikes. We were just exchanging some jokes and crude humor in the dark, like guys in their 20s do, about to go to sleep in our sleeping bags. When we quieted down, we began to hear it. Talking. The sound of machinery. Given our location, this was profoundly weird. We camped in a tent because there were no huts nearby. Maybe there was another camp somewhere near us. We couldn't quite make out what was being said, but it was a human voice, no doubt about it. But nothing really could explain the sound of heavy machinery. It sounded like an excavator or a tank, something big, powerful, and really not too far away. Combined with the sound of talking, we thought construction yard. But at the time of night, in an unpopulated, protected nature reserve, we got out of our tent. It was cold and pitch black. The campfire had some coals still glowing. We took out our flashlights. My 2 buddies have always been a lot braver than me. The sound was clearly coming from the north, maybe half a kilometer away. We thought the construction might be going on behind a small hill some distance away. We could see no lights or anything. We still could not make out what was being said. The speaking-like voice was monotonous, and it was impossible even to say what language was being used. Still sounded a lot like a person speaking though. You may be aware of the sort of spooky phenomenon of hearing a human voice in static. Maybe you've used a blow dryer and been sure someone is talking, turned it off, and it was just something in the brain tried to interpret from the steady hum. Maybe it was sort of something like that. It's hard to explain. The machinery-like sound continued, not loud, but you could sort of make out the powerful engine, at times accelerating or adding power, and at times idle. My 2 friends resolved to go find out what was going on. We put our warm clothes back on, donned boots, and I sat next to the dying fire, adding some more wood to it. I would stay at camp while my buddies left to check out this mystery construction yard in the middle of nowhere in the Lapland woods. So there I sat. The guys took out their maps, took a compass heading, and left, and I could hear them make their way through the forest, seeing the light from their flashlights. Then they were gone. The weird sounds continued unaltered. They were gone 15 minutes, then maybe 30, and the better part of an hour. It was odd. Judging by the volume of the sound, they should have reached it, checked it out, and been back already. I added more firewood and tried to make out what the person talking was saying, but it was too tinny and obscure. The guys had been away for over 2 hours. I figured they had stayed for coffee with the construction guys or something, then the sound stopped. Just like that. It just ended, all at the same time. The engine sound and the voice both just quit. It was very silent. I waited for another 30 minutes, very worried now that something had happened, that maybe my friends were lost. Should I go and try to find them? I shouted their names several times and built the fire pretty big. I was scared shitless when suddenly I saw the flashlights of my friends. Apparently they were returning in a hurry. The guys got back to camp out of breath. They told me the following. They had followed the sound beyond the small ridge in the distance. There was nothing there, and it seemed like they were not getting any closer to the source of the sounds. They had to stop every now and then, be quiet, and listen to it to be able to walk toward it. They walked and stopped like this for some time, then realized they were not getting any closer. The sounds did not change in volume at all. They decided to go just a bit further several times when suddenly the sound just stopped, like someone pressed a button on a recording. They realized they had been going on for a long time. They were in the middle of the dark woods, alone. They reversed the heading and started back at a brisk pace. Eventually, they saw my big-ass fire from the top of a hill and found their way back. The weird thing is, we seemed to think the sound stopped at different times. They had been gone for 2.5 hours in total. They said the sound stopped at around 1 hour 15 minutes mark after they left. Then they started to head back immediately. The return trip taking a bit longer even though they kept a good pace, they apparently wandered around for a bit. For me, the sound stopped at the 2-hour mark, just 30 minutes before they returned. We did not sleep that night. Nothing more happened in that trip, and we never found out what the weird construction yard-like sound was about. When we returned to the park's visitor center some 5 days later, we asked around, but no one knew of any ongoing construction taking place in the whole national park area. Been bugging me ever since. Story 25. One morning when I was 15, my dad looked tired and stressed. I asked him what was up. He said he had an awfully realistic dream of me killing myself. Said in the dream he came into my room to find me hanging from my neck in the closet. It bothered him so bad that he actually came and checked on me while I was asleep. Not too big of a deal, but not cool as I thought. 20 minutes later, my sis comes into the room, fresh from waking up. She looks at me and first thing she said was, "Damn, Brace, I had a weird dream. I came into your room and you had shot yourself in the head. It was messed up." I told her that Dad had a dream about me killing myself last night too, and had him explain it to her. We just kinda sat there in an unnerving silence. I've never been suicidal, but that freaked the whole fam out. Story 26. In 2003, my best friend had gone missing and ended up being murdered. It was a huge news story and tore me up inside. Back when it had occurred, there were some issues going on in his personal life. I was living a couple of hours away. Anyway, my birthday was on June 15th, which was on a Sunday. I was hanging at my friend's house the morning of Saturday the 14th, from which I distinctly remember having a bad signal in my cell. Always. I was hanging out at the time and we were in front of my friend's house. I called my other friend, the one who was killed, that morning asking him what he was doing and that my birthday was the next day, and that night we had planned to go to a rap concert. He said he wanted to come down but there was some trouble and he wasn't alone. He mentioned he was with his roommate and I told him they could both come down. Without giving too much detail, he mentioned he was in fear of his life and I told him to come lay low at my house and Monday we would drive back and go to the police. My friend whose house I was at also had chimed in, remembering me having the conversation in full. My friend on the other end of the phone line said he would drive down and stay over. He never showed up. I called him on my birthday infuriated that he never showed up. He never answered the phone. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was very drunk, but something didn't seem right. I got a call Monday morning from his long-distance girlfriend saying he hadn't spoken to him since Tuesday. I told her to calm down and that I had spoken to him. Well, I got a call from his parents as well, begging me to check on his dorm room at the local university. I drove down with a friend I was getting stoned with on Saturday and we got led into his place. He had 2 baby bullies who looked starved when we walked in. There was dog shit everywhere. We checked the apartment and it was a mess. I went into his bedroom and there was a suitcase in the bed, half packed with folded clothes in the bag and on the bed very neatly. This was how my friend was with his clothing. It was a 2-3 night bag. Something was wrong. Fast forward, he was missing for a month, and then with some pushing, his body was found. I won't go into detail about that portion. I will say this, however. The FBI ended up telling me he was dead 2 to 3 days before the day I spoke with him. Furthermore, there was no cell phone record of the call, or so I was told. I can't say how accurate the body decomp time of death was due to the body being in a field during the summer in a southern high heat state. The FBI was positive with what they told me though. To this day, I know I spoke to my friend who died. My other friend who I am still friends with can vouch for this. Apparently they say it isn't so, but this is definitely something that will sit with me for the rest of my life in addition to the event itself. Story 27. When I was in first grade or so, I had this crazy dream that my best friend was actually there with me having a sleepover. I woke up, saw him in the air mattress, and he sat up and started to float. He goes, "Look, I think I can fly." And I said, "Oh my gosh, you can. Maybe I can too." And I could. So we flew around my bedroom together, and he pulled a book off my bookshelf using telekinesis, and we read it. That's all I could remember. The next day, I go to school and tell my friend about my dream. I explained that he was over for a slumber party, he woke up in the middle of the night, started to float, etc., and his face gets panicked. He stops me and says, "I think I had that exact dream." I said, "Seriously?" And he says, "Yeah, you could fly too, and we flew around your room together, and I could move things with my mind. And I moved a book off your bookshelf." Story 28. Hope this counts. I've stopped telling people this story as no one ever believed me. I'll never forget it. It's been driving me crazy for 30 years. I'm sorry for the length of this. When I was a kid in England, in primary school around 1987-ish, a new kid joined the school on a temporary basis for a term. He had an American accent and was ginger. His name was Lee. Before he left us, he brought into school what today would look sort of like a tablet computer, but this was very thin with brown tan glass. He had cartoons on it. He totally loved cartoons and movies. I swear this happened. I didn't dream it. It It was amazing. There was a crowd of kids who saw it, and their reaction was interesting because they liked it and wanted one, comparing it to the Nintendo Game & Watch and calculators, but sort of accepted it and didn't think it was magical, but it certainly was. I said to him it was like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy prop used in the TV series. He didn't know what it meant. He kept it away from the teachers and didn't bring it back in. I kept asking him questions about his calculator TV, and he just gave vague answers and said he didn't know. But when I asked where he bought it, he said his dad got it from the US. One other thing he said, he saw a movie that had every cartoon character ever. A few years later, I realized he was talking about Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which came out soon after. This was 30 years ago, and you can imagine how difficult in all this time it's been to describe this thing, as we haven't had ubiquitous tablets everywhere. I used to draw diagrams of it and show it to people. I went crazy when I saw the Tom Hanks movie Big, the scene where he pitches a handheld comic book video device. My parents just sort of acknowledged it, just humoring me. When Star Trek TNG came out and the pad was shown on screen, I went, "That's it! That's the thing!" Eventually the tablet PC came out, and I remember thinking, finally, at last. The video iPod was further confirmation. Today it's obvious that it was a tablet computer, and my story sounds more convenient and bullshit. I suppose I could track some other kids down on Facebook to prove this. I bet they would remember. Naturally, no one believes me. Story 29. A couple of weeks ago, my friend's dad told me a pretty bizarre story that scarred me for life. About 15 years ago, my friend's parents, Steve and Julie, were woken up at 1 a.m. to a very loud thud that rattled the house. Worried that one of the kids had fallen out of the bunk bed, Steve went downstairs to check on them, but all three kids were sound asleep and safe in their beds. Julie told Steve to check on the house in case of intruders, so Steve checked the doors and windows before going outside to take a look. After 10 minutes of investigating the noise, Steve came across nothing unusual and went back inside to go to bed. He found his wife absolutely worried sick, and she demanded to know where the hell he had gone and what happened. Confused and tired, Steve told her he found nothing and tried to calm her down before Julie pointed out that it was now 4 a.m. and that he had been missing for 3 hours. Julie had even gone outside to check on him, and he was nowhere to be found, and didn't respond to her calling his name. Unable to figure out what happened, they returned to bed and slept until Steve had to get up for work in a few hours. Steve owns a painting business, and a couple of hours after working on a house, he noticed his eyes started to feel itchy. Then his eyes started to burn. Then after a couple of hours, his eyes burned so badly that he was holding his eyelids open as to not blink, because it felt like his lids were sandpaper against his eyes. His employees rushed him to the hospital, and Steve was treated for second-degree flash burns on his eyes. He was told his burns were equivalent to staring at a welder's torch without eye protection for an extended period of time. His eyes were treated, and he was lucky to have his vision fully restored. He's one of the most stand-up guys I know, and the way he told the story gave me the f***ing creeps. Dead serious and no explanation for what happened. His wife was there too, and she was visibly upset when he was telling me that story. Story 30. I was 19 and had a weird dream that stood out. My brother and I were walking to a Subway restaurant near where I live, and my head hurt, and my ear was burning. As I entered, I reached into my pocket and withdrew the cross my father gave me, which I wear every day around my neck. Then I woke up. The dream was short and made no sense. A few months later, I get into a fight with a guy in our neighborhood. My brother was there with me. Walking away from the scene, we decided to duck into the nearby Subway so I can get cleaned up. When I realized the chain I wear my cross on is broken, dangling on either side of my neck. The guy I was fighting had broken it during the fight. The cross is missing. We 180 and go back to the scene and search and find nothing. Back to Subway. By now, a headache had started to set in. And during the fight, the guy grabbed my ear and it was burning. As I stepped into the Subway, I remember that dream, and I realized that I was experiencing it in the moment now. That this was the moment I reached into my pocket, and there it was, my cross, in the middle of my palm. I have no idea how it got there. It could have fallen in. In fact, it would have made more sense to have been anywhere else. But there it was. Story 31. I was in my living room looking out the window at the street, and I see a neighbor from a few doors down going down the street on her scooter. She's morbidly obese. My living room has 2 sets of windows, separated by a bit of wall, so if someone walks by, there's a slight gap when you see them. So I was sitting there, she scoots by the first window, there's a beat, and she never appears out the other side. I continue watching both the windows to see if she comes out or turns around, and there's nothing. I get up and go to the window to see the entire street, and she's completely gone. There were no other places to go as she was on the sidewalk and couldn't scoot across the grass, and she couldn't go into the street because she would tip over the curb. Her 2 directions were left further up the street or right back where she came. She disappeared and was going neither. I even went outside to see if there was somewhere else I missed that she could have gone. Nothing. She went past my window and was promptly deleted from existence. Sounds to me like she disappeared into fat air.
Serious. People of Reddit, what was the creepiest thing you experienced that you thought was paranormal, but was actually much scarier when you found out what really caused it? Story 1. When my friends and I initially entered college, we used to chill a lot in my friend's dad's house, who lived out in the country. Late at night, when scanning the horizon, you could see all of the stars. It wasn't like the city, but you could also see a radio tower perhaps a few miles away. One late fall night, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, we decided to drive out to this radio tower, just out of curiosity. It was in the middle of a large field with one entrance that happened to be open. We entered from there and drove about 1/4 of a mile in towards the radio tower. When we got there, we noticed underneath the radio tower a rusty, beat-up car. The thing looked like it hadn't been driven in years. We pulled to the other side of the tower and just chilled for a little bit, talking about whatever and listening to music. Then one of my friends pointed towards the beat-up car. "Does it look like there's a light in there?" he said. We all stared at the car, and sure enough, emanating behind the dust-covered windows of the car was a dim light. We pretty quickly put our car in drive and started moving out of there. It was a field though, so of course we moved relatively slowly. The same friend who pointed out the light noticed that the car started moving along with us, following slowly. It didn't put on its headlights, but the light inside the car seemed to glow brighter. That was the moment that my friend driving screamed, "Screw it!" and hightailed it faster than I'd ever seen. We left the junk car in the dust, literally in this case, and from that day we had always referred to this story as the ghost car story. Did we really believe in ghosts? Probably not, but paranormal is better than whatever else it could have been. Come to find out a few years later, that field was regularly being monitored by the local sheriff's office for big drug deals that apparently went down there. Had we stuck around any longer that night than we did, we could have legitimately been killed. This was also in the era that we watched a lot of Breaking Bad, so in retrospect, it seemed to us like that could have very much been a likely outcome from that night. Luckily, we were all good, and nothing bad ever came of it for any of us. Story 2. For several months during my senior year of high school and all through the summer before I left for college, I kept hearing noises coming from the attic above my bedroom. I would only hear it at night, and I told my parents and brothers that it sounded like someone walking in the attic and dragging a chain in the ground. My dad even had me go sleep on the couch one night so he could sleep in my room to try to hear it. My older brother went up into the attic. Nothing. I left for college and didn't really think much of it. When I returned to my first visit home, my dad revealed he'd found a slow leak in one of the pipes that rotted a hole in the ceiling above my bed. The drip of water had been ricocheting around the pipes, sounding like chains dragging. Story 3. Literally my earliest memory. I was 5 years old and playing in a pile of leaves in our backyard. The yard had a brick wall at the far end. On the opposite side was a highway. There were a few openings along the bottom of the wall, for drainage, I guess. So I'm playing in the leaves and suddenly I hear this super weird noise. It was like a high-pitched yowl. And then I saw this weird thing emerge from one of those holes at the bottom of the wall. It was moving slowly and really weirdly, and I froze in the leaf pile and just watched. I distinctly remember whispering to myself, "A monster," because I 100% thought it was a monster. It staggered up to the leaf pile and I realized it was just a cat. I knew what cats were because my dad loved cats, and we had several pets. This cat was enormous, and he was also very fluffy. Think Crookshanks from Harry Potter. So I grabbed this cat and dragged him into the house to show my parents. Here's the scarier and sadder part, that I didn't realize until I was older. Apparently, someone had thrown the cat against the brick wall from their car. That was the noise I heard. The reason the cat was walking so weirdly was that his spine was broken. There was a real monster that day. It just wasn't the cat. Story 4. I had a friend who was staying at a ski lodge, and he went outside at night to smoke a cigarette. While he was out there, he said it seemed like an invisible monster was coming right at him. He heard it stomping, even smelled it, felt its breath as it charged at him, and then it passed through him and it was gone. Turns out, it was a grizzly bear, stomping its way around the floor directly underneath where he was. Story 5. About 7 years ago, my family rented a one-story house. It was originally one bigger house that was split off into two, and there was another family that lived in the other part that we didn't really talk with. During the night, I would hear what sounds like knocks above the ceiling, but any entrance to the small crawl space between the ceiling and the roof was patched up when the house was divided. For a while, I thought there was a ghost who lived in the attic, and I would have trouble going to sleep without a light on. After we moved out, I heard through the grapevine that the neighbor's kid was caught spying on the new people that moved in. Turns out that he had broken a hole in the ceiling of his closet to get into the crawl space, and had been looking through holes that he had bored in the ceiling overlooking the other part of the house. The noises I heard were him moving around on his arms and knees up there. Story 6. As a young kid, I had nightmares of waking up to see my mother hovering over my bed by the window. She just blankly stared down at me and my sister. I'd get so scared yelling, "Mom! Mom!" and she never responded. I knew it was not my mom. When I was older, I told my aunt about it and she told me they weren't dreams. It was real. My mom would go into our rooms randomly to check on us. She had serious mental health issues that got worse over the years. Occasionally, she would have episodes of anxiety about something happening to us and guard us at night. The traumatic death of her first child apparently triggered obsessive anxiety when we were young. I now know the whole messed up backstory and can sympathize with why it would make any parent get to that mental state. But I still shudder when I think of the blank face stare. I still tend to associate the nightmare mom as not being my mom. That's kinda sad, actually. Story 7. When I was 12-ish something, I came home to find the bedroom lights on. If it was just my bedroom, then it would have been a problem. But my brother's room lights were also on, and we never leave those lights on. Could have been my brother or my mom, but one was in the army while the other was at work. I was a little freaked out, but tried to tone it down by saying that I might have left them on before going out. Then I turn and see a couple of wooden spoons on top of our kitchen table. I knew for a fact that I hadn't left any spoons sitting there. I also didn't recognize those 2 spoons. That was when I realized that someone had been inside our house. Long story short, I had lost my keys a few days prior, and my neighbor, who was the same age as me, found them. Instead of giving them back, he kept them to himself. Days later, his mom asked him to, deliver something to my mom. But there was no one at home, so he used his keys to enter our house. He forgot his mom's wooden spoons there, and if it wasn't for this, we would never have found out that he entered our house. I think he stole money from us as well. Still doesn't explain why he had his mom's spoons with him. Lol. Story 8. I knew a kid when I was 10 who lived alone with his father up a dirt road in the middle of the woods. We were pretty good friends one summer. Everyone in our area, rural as hell, we all knew each other, thought the dad was really weird. Amongst the younger kids, there were rumors that the dad was a monster or a zombie or something. For one, he smelled freaking awful and had the rankest carrion breath. Also, he would stare at the kids a lot. Creepy as hell. When I was 14, I found out that my friend was not the guy's son. The creepy guy had in fact kidnapped him when he was 7 or so and had kept him captive up in the woods, raping him repeatedly. My friend also turned 14 when I did, which apparently was too old to be appealing to the creepy dad, who promptly kidnapped another little boy from a town about 70 miles away and brought him back to the cabin where he lived with my friend. He was even trying to pay another teenager I knew, a kind of lost boy with a juvenile record, to take my friend out into the woods and kill him so he could be alone with his new victim, who was, I think, 5 years old. My friend realized that the same had happened to him. He'd been brainwashed for 7 years, told that his parents didn't want him anymore, and had given him to the creepy guy to adopt. So he waited until the creep went to work, grabbed the little boy, and hitchhiked and walked about 40 miles to the nearest police station, saved the kid from a terrible fate. Ended up going back to the family he'd been taken from 7 years before. It was in the news a lot, and a TV movie was made, etc. So the creepy, smelly old weirdo really was a freaking monster. He died in prison, and that was a good day. Story 9. Family thought I was possessed by the devil. Turned out to be a life-threatening cyst in my brain that was close to killing me. When I was around 11 years old, my family said I would randomly flip out for no reason. We'd be sitting at dinner, and my mom told me, on more than one occasion, I'd throw my silverware across the room and start cursing and wailing at my brother. Completely unprovoked, I'd start beating the crap out of my then 8 and 10-year-old brothers. And one time, I even hit my grandma. It got to a point where I'd have to eat by myself. The worst part of it was that I'd have no memory of those outbursts at all. I had no idea why my brothers were afraid of me, why I'd have to eat alone every night, and why everyone seemingly hated me. It was an extremely alienating childhood experience, to say the least. And for a short time, I was not in action, but definitely in my thoughts. My teachers, friends, and other family members couldn't understand what my family was talking about. To them, I was the sweetest, smartest, and humblest kid they'd ever met. I was loved by everyone outside of my home. My mom brought me to a psychologist, a therapist, and at one point, a Catholic priest. She actually thought I may have shown signs of being possessed. She told them I'd become a different kid in front of their eyes. And because I had no recollection of anything she'd been talking about, but seeing the extent of what she was willing to do to get to the bottom of it, I was inclined to believe her. One day with my dad, I went to the movies and fell in the lobby and hit my head. Gave me a nasty concussion. To make a long story short, a CAT scan had been done, and they found out that I had a cyst in my head below the arachnoid of my left temporal lobe. The cyst was the size of a baseball and was growing. My brain was being crushed against the right of my skull and it was causing severe damage to my medulla oblongata. We went to a neurologist at Stony Brook University Hospital who took a closer look at my case. A very bright doctor by the name of Dr. Agnor. This man saved my life. He said that falling and hitting my head was a miracle because I was mere weeks away from dying in my sleep of a hemorrhage and said I'd need to be in surgery by the end of that week. It was at that point he asked my mom why they hadn't brought me in sooner. She was like, "Well, I'm not a neurologist, so..." And he said, "I'm sure he's been showing signs of something going wrong. Outbursts of anger, memory loss, unexplained nosebleeds, severe depression." I'll never forget the look on my mom's face. Her eyes widened. She turned and looked at me, grabbed my face, and started sobbing uncontrollably. I still get emotional thinking about this. She just kept saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," over and over. Tears poured down her face. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "It's okay, Mommy. I'm gonna be better soon," with a hopeful bounce in my voice. That was 22 years ago. The doctor saved my life and there were no complications after the surgery. The outbursts had completely stopped, and after only 1 month of recovery, I was back in school and I had gotten on the honor roll for the first time in my life. I was able to fix my relationships with my brothers by being the best brother I could be for them. And for the last 2 years of my grandma's life, I made sure I told her I loved her every day. Never said anything even remotely nasty to her. That surgery fixed me in so many ways, and I owe it all to a slip and fall at the movie theater. Story 10. There was one time when I was younger that I was home alone in my and my mother's old townhouse. I'd been downstairs in the living room and suddenly felt uncomfortable being down there alone, so I decided to go to my room. I get about halfway up the stairs when I feel this horrible sense of dread and panic, and I look back and see this complete silhouette of a man, complete from head to toe, standing in the corner at the bottom of the steps. I could feel him looking at me even though there were no eyes. I ran up the stairs and locked myself in my room until my mother got home. It wasn't until years later that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which explained that happening and a lot of other things I was going through, seeing and hearing. I've gotten more used to the things I've seen and heard over the years, and the medication helps immensely. But I remember that moment so clearly because it scared me so deeply. I'll never forget it. Story 11. This happened to my cousin's friend, living in San Francisco in the early 90s. I was just a kid, so I don't remember the exact details. Her friend lived in a typical SF apartment, often coming home late from work. One night when she was trying to sleep, she heard loud banging noises coming from upstairs, followed by sounds of washing. The washing noise went on for hours. She thought it was annoying, but completely normal. The upstairs neighbor probably couldn't sleep and decided to move some furniture and deep clean the bathroom. The next morning, she saw her neighbor going downstairs with large black trash bags. Again, she told herself it was weird but normal, since her neighbor has been up late cleaning. A few weeks later, she learned that her upstairs neighbor had gotten into a dispute with a roommate and was killed and dismembered. The roommate was caught and the police discovered large trash bags of body parts. The incident happened that night when she heard strange noises. Story 12. My uncle bought an old house, 150-ish years old, as a fix-up project. If you went up the stairs, you had the option to turn right or left. The left led to a series of bedrooms, and the right had a landing in one bedroom past it. If you took the dog upstairs, she would cry and run away if you tried to take her right. My cousin insisted that the bedroom to the right was haunted, thus the frightened dog. Later, we worked in the house and found that the landing to the right was structurally unsafe. To this day, we wonder, did the dog know the landing was unsafe somehow, or was there something more sinister at play? Story 13. A little after I graduated high school, some friends and I were hanging out at a local park after dark. I decided to go walk through the woods for the spookiness of it. About 20 minutes in, we heard this loud screaming from behind us and barely saw this dark figure rushing towards us at what we would describe as supernatural speed. So we hauled ass and didn't stop until we were out of the wooded area and didn't see it. A couple of friends claimed it appeared to be floating towards us as it howled like a banshee. We later found out that the area of the woods is popular for homeless people to hang out in and shoot up. So instead of some sort of evil wood spirit, it was most likely a homeless heroin addict running at us at full speed and screaming. Story 14. I had a blind dog growing up, and she barked at things that were there and things that weren't. One night around midnight, she woke up my mom and me, my dad's too heavy of a sleeper, by barking at the wall next to the back door. I woke up, but I was maybe 9, so I went right back to sleep. My mom got up and ushered her back to bed. That same night, an arsonist hit my neighborhood. He set fire to a luckily vacant house for sale and it burned to the ground. Following his footsteps in the snow, He then passed between my bedroom and our garage and nearly lit our garage. Then our dog and my mom woke up, and we think that scared him away, and went across the street and burned the neighbor's garage instead. Then he stood in their front yard and watched it burn. He walked out onto the street and they lost his footsteps. They never caught him. Rest in peace, Oreo. I miss you. You were a very good pup. Love you. Be good. Story 15. When I was 8, we were on a long holiday, staying in a town called Surat. It's in Queensland, Australia. I was staying in their son's room who had moved to Brisbane for university. Each night I had the same recurring nightmare of an alien tentacle trying to grab me. After a week, I was terrified of going to sleep, but my parents kept telling me that I was okay. I was just frightened because we were staying somewhere new and that it would be okay. Well, I couldn't get to sleep. I kept watching the clock, waiting for the sun to come up, and was terrified of the alien. It was just after 2 a.m. when a large tentacle landed on the bed. I screamed in terror as I felt the tentacle wriggling. I jumped out of bed and kept screaming. My parents, aunt, uncle, and sister run into the room to find me huddled in the corner screaming. Turns out it was an adult carpet python over 2 meters long, or 6.5 feet. Each night, it worked its way under a ceiling tile and onto the bed. I still have an Indiana Jones fear of snake. Why did it have to be snakes? Story 16. We lived in this big, beautiful farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, California. It was my first time having my own room. Mom was devastated because the landlord evicted us after a few months, saying, "We need the house back for the farmhands." There may have been more to it, but I was a little kid at the time. My uncle helped us pack everything up and asked if we left anything in the attic. Mom said she'd never been up there, but he was welcome to look. There was only one entrance, through my bedroom. When he got up there, he found my favorite Cabbage Patch doll hung by its neck from the ceiling. There had been candles in a circle beneath it that had been burned to wax puddles and cigarette butts on the floor. It looked like someone was conducting a seance up there with my toys. After that, Mom was totally fine with us moving out as fast as humanly possible. Wish I had a better ending for you, but we never found out who did it or why. My only clue is one night my sister claimed to see the silhouette of a man hanging out in her doorway watching her sleep. Mom was a single parent at the time. We didn't have a father figure or visiting relatives, so who knows? Story 17. This did not happen to me, but it happened in my city when I was in high school. A family thought that their house was haunted because things like furniture and objects would randomly move or go missing. This went on for several months. They even reached out to their pastor to bless the house. Well, the house wasn't haunted. It turned out that a drifter had wandered in at some point and had been living in their attic. He would come out when the family was at work and eat their food and go through their things for cash and stuff to sell. One day, one of the family members came home unexpectedly and caught them, called the police for an active break-in. The cops quickly discovered what had been going on. Story 18. Didn't think this was paranormal, but definitely thought it was creepy and ended up being more than I bargained for. When I was 13, I had a small jewelry box my mom gave me that had cushions for rings. I had 6 rings that I kept in it. Nothing of value. Think mood rings and silver rings. I was somewhat neurotic as a kid and had spent an afternoon arranging my room, and I'd put the 6 rings in a specific order. I opened the box one day and noticed that 2 of the rings were out of order. I thought someone in my family had moved them because there was zero explanation for this. I asked my family if anyone had touched them, and they all insisted no one had opened the box, but I was convinced someone had to have gone through it. My dad ended up going through our entire house, checking for missing stuff, and the only missing things were an old bottle of hydrocodone from the medicine cabinet and some of my mom's gold jewelry from a bathroom drawer. Turns out there had been strings of robberies in the neighborhood where thieves had broken in, but only taken prescription drugs and small gold items. None of the robberies had indications that the homes had been broken into, and things like laptops, diamond jewelry, and other valuables had been left alone. My family wouldn't have known anything was amiss aside from the fact that I was so convinced something was off. Story 19. When I was with my ex, we lived in his parents for a bit in a kind of granny flat above their garage. I'd often take naps through the day while he was at work, and stuff would inexplicably move around or go missing while I was asleep. Never happened when he was home or when he was awake. I was convinced the place was haunted, and whatever spirit it was had it out for me. Turns out his dad was coming in and doing this, the intention of making it look like I was nuts, so I would be discredited when I spoke out against his son. Story 20. Towards the second half of high school, everything started feeling like it was all going downhill. It felt like to me there was some unseen outside force making my life hell. Turns out that I actually have type 1 diabetes, and in that time of my second half of high school was when I first experienced the symptoms of the condition.
What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality?
I'm a teacher assistant in our college's anatomy class, which takes place in the cadaver lab. Late one night, I'm working alone in the cadaver lab and I start to hear a noise. It's hard to tell what the noise sounds like, but it's a consistent, muffled noise. I kind of walk around the room and locate it. Now, normally, they're all kept in these big metal crates, but at the time we had one more than we did crates, so one was in a plastic body bag, and that's where the noise was coming from. I'm terrified at this point. All alone in the lab, looking down at this plastic bag that I can see the outline of the body that presumably is coming back to life because it is definitely making noise. I stood over this for a solid minute, debating whether I should open the bag, and finally the noise just stopped. I got all my stuff together and bolted from the lab. A couple weeks later, the professor tells me to be careful if I ever work on that because there is a live pacemaker in it, so don't cut into that. And it will vibrate and ring every few hours if it's low on battery. I let out the biggest sigh of relief that we weren't haunted. That's one way to find out if your quiet place is truly quiet. Story 2. Once woke up to the sound of heavy breathing and felt as if I was being watched. I couldn't move for a while either. Then I just blurted out my dog's name and kept calling for him. He didn't run over, and as soon as I could get myself to move, I went looking for him. Found him sitting in the kitchen doorway, just staring straight forward. I started calling him from right behind him, and he wouldn't even turn around. Then I touched his back, and he turned to glance at me, but went right back to his trance. A year or so after the fact, I found out that the first thing was probably sleep paralysis. Not too sure about what was going on with the dog, though. Story 3. Freaking auditory hallucinations. Screw those. Was driving down a really dark rural road at night. I was super sleep-deprived and drank several of those 240 milligram caffeine Monster energy drinks. I didn't have the radio on, so it was pretty quiet. Then the whispering started. I'm confused and didn't understand what it was. Tried to focus on it. Was my stereo not all the way off? Then it started mumbling louder. Crap, this ain't good. Then I hear a very clear, turn here. But my GPS says continue for 12 miles. Nope, screw that. I turn the radio on really loud and continue home. Next, physically, I mention it to Doc. Am I insane? Both sleep deprivation and caffeine have been known to induce auditory hallucinations individually. Combining both, it's perfectly normal to hear things. If it happens again, come back in. Thought I was going mental. Story 4. Not necessarily creepy, but definitely made me question reality. I used to work in a gas station. One regular customer was like night and day. One day he'd be soft-spoken and shy, the next he'd be obnoxious. His cigarette preference also changed from day to day, but he always came in the same work truck with the same guys at the same time of day. One day he walked in and went straight to the bathroom. A minute later he walked in again and came to the counter. Twins. It took me 8 months to realize they were twins. Not even identical twins either. They just looked really similar. Story 5. There was an old man who lived on the road I drove every day to get to the highway. He sat on his front porch drinking his morning coffee, and he always waved at me when I drove by, and I always waved back. This went on for the better part of a decade. One day I was talking to my neighbor and how much Mr. So-and-so waving made my morning awesome, and I was glad he was still kicking around. My neighbor says, "Wait, what? He's been gone for 3 years. Never saw him again. Who was I waving at?" Story 6. When I was just old enough to not need a childminder after school, I was home alone one summer's day. My parents, who would not be back until later, made me promise to lock the door and not answer the door to strangers. I did this religiously, as I was also anxious about being in the house by myself. There was a hefty bolt in our front door, and I was to make sure I used it. I would see my folks come home and know to unlock it. So I'm in the house, playing with Lego upstairs. I hear the unmistakable sound of the front door open and close. I even felt the percussive thud that was so familiar as the door closed. Thinking one of my parents must have come home early, I went down to greet them. No one there. I then saw the bolt was still across. Now my body runs cold as I start racing through the possibilities to explain this. I check all the doors and windows and panic. All locked. It was a standard 4-bedroom family house, not a mansion. Easily checked. I'm alone in the house. So how the heck is the bolt across? Impossible to open that door from the outside, key or no key. I'm sure it was the door I heard. The house was silent and there was a very loud and distinctive noise. It did not compute. I noped out of there fast and went to a friend's house. He did not believe me and was certain I was winding him up. Story 7. When I was a kid, between 8 or 9, I used to wake up every night to headlights coming through my bedroom window. The lights would then stop and turn off, not as if a car drove by, but as if they were turned off. Then the long shadows of a man as if looking through my window would pass by and stop in front of my window. I'd lay really still and pretend nothing happened. Every night, for months. Eventually, I convinced myself it was imagination. Now that I think back, it stopped when my stepdad moved in. My mom was single, but I was convinced it wasn't real.
Across the street lived my best friend, whose mom was also single and she refused to sleep in her bedroom. Her window faced my window. She told me years later it was because every night a man would park in her side yard and walk over to my yard. The long shadows were from the light in her yard. She eventually decided it was my dad checking on us and never told me until I was a teenager. It wasn't my dad. I asked him. So I thought I was crazy and hallucinating for years, and perhaps I wasn't, or two kids were having odd dreams at the same time every night. Story 8. I would have chalked this up as a dream, except I know I was awake because I really had to whiz. I woke up in the middle of the night, having to pee really bad as mentioned above, and from my position on the top bunk I could see into the hallway. The bathroom was right across the hall from my bedroom door and also right in my vision. I was just starting to climb down and go to the bathroom when I saw, heard, and felt the footsteps of a man coming down the hall and going into the bathroom. I thought it must be my dad, but that was strange because he and my mom had their own bathroom. Even stranger, he didn't turn on the light or close the door. So after a while, I got annoyed because I really had to go and I called out to him. No answer. I finally climbed down and switch on the light and find an empty bathroom. I'd definitely seen a figure, heard the footsteps, and felt the vibrations of the footsteps of a large man come down the hall and go in there. I was about 10 when this happened, but I remember it so vividly because that is the freakiest thing that's ever happened to me, paranormally speaking. Story 9. I dreamed it was dark, raining, and I was in the woods walking towards a campfire. There were 3 men around me whom I had never seen before. One was wearing a shirt and pants with huge white and black horizontal stripes on it, such as a prisoner may wear. I could not figure out why I was not scared in my dream. Fast forward 10 months later, we're hunting and camping. A friend brings along 3 of his friends that we had never met before. I had to go to the bathroom, buried a 50-gallon drum and put a seat on it. My husband walks with me since it's dark. We start back and it starts to rain. We get to the clearing and there are his 3 friends around the fire, one wearing the outfit described above. I wasn't afraid in my dream because my husband was behind me and I just couldn't see him. No one believes me. Story 10. I worked at a small retail shop that sold mostly small accessories and clothes. I've never really believed in ghosts, but my coworkers always swore the place was haunted. Lights would flicker randomly and canvases would fall violently to the ground, despite my efforts of propping them up so that they didn't. The thing that really made me question everything happened when I was closing alone at night. We had a sunglass display in the middle of the store, just a flat glass shelf with a bunch of sunglasses laid out nicely on top. I walk past it to the register and hear this huge crash. Look back and all the sunglasses were on the floor. It looked like somebody just took their arm and dragged it across the shelf, pushing them all off. There wasn't anything above the display, so nothing could have knocked it off. I don't have an explanation for it. It was right as I was about to close, too. It was a rude ghost. Story 11. There were 2. The first one was a UFO. I saw a light streak across the sky, make a 90-degree turn and streak away until it vanished. Years later, I learned that it was probably just an asteroid breaking up. Put that one to rest. Once, when I was about 8, we were driving along a road in the backcountry and I was staring out the window. And in the distance, in a field, I saw a silvery or green glowing cloud that was completely unnatural. It suddenly moved, almost ran towards the road, then up a tree just as we were passing it. As we climbed a hill, I saw it drop from the tree onto the road and flow back into the fields. Story 12. When I was 19, I worked 3rd shift and was a little paranoid. I would take different routes to and from work, just in case. One night as I was driving to work, I saw what was the stereotypical grim, black hood, no-face scythe. It was just standing in a field, leaning on the scythe and watching me go by. I freaked out. Once I got to work, I called my best friend and told him. That way, if I passed away, someone would know. Work went fine that night. I forgot it after a few nights. A week or so later, it was the same route on rotation, but to go home instead of going to work. I was involved in a head-on collision that temporarily ended me. I woke up a week later with extra parts and a lot of damage. My best friend asked me what route I had taken home, and I lost it because it was the route I had seen grim before. Story 13. I'm the type of person who keeps my bedroom door closed and locked all the time, no matter what, even if I'm home alone. So like a year ago, it was 1 a.m. and I decided to get a glass of water before going to bed. After coming back to my room, I swore that I closed and locked my door. After about 30 minutes of me dozing in and out of sleep, I suddenly felt all the ambient noise completely dissipate and immediately got that something feels off feeling. I got up and saw that my door was wide open. It scared the crap out of me as I was home alone. I've just chalked it up to being a one-time mishap on my part. Story 14. Talking with my son when he was 3 or 4 years old while he was playing with a Darth Vader toy in his mom's lap. Talking about the Wiggles or Barney or whatever. Completely unprompted, he said nonchalantly, "Dingo cold, dingo cold." And he goes back to playing with his Star Wars toys. I asked him what he said and he denied saying anything with a giggle. My wife very clearly heard him say Dingo Gold, too. I never told him about my childhood best friend Dingo, being ended in an avalanche 10 years earlier. Story 15. I've related this before, but I'll repeat it again. I can think of a few things that happened in my first year of college. I used to live in an apartment kind of place on campus with 3 other people. We all had our separate bedrooms, but shared a living space. It was on the 7th floor, to give a better idea. Once I woke up at around 2 a.m. to find that my phone was automatically playing a song. I closed the app, but it happened 2 to 3 times again. I would have put this down to my phone being weird, but then one of my roommates told me the exact same thing happened to her as well. This wasn't all. A few days later, I woke up to a beeping sound coming from my phone, and when I checked, it was apparently a sound recording. The duration shows as 0.00 though, which meant that it shouldn't technically play at all. I deleted it immediately. Another time, my roommate and I were watching a movie and had stayed up until 3. It ended and she went to sleep. After a few minutes, she burst into my room and asked me what I was doing. I was confused because I was just lying in bed, reading. She said that she heard very weird noises from the window, which she assumed I was making to scare her or something. I went to her room and it sounded like heavy breathing or sighing. I told her it is just the wind. We opened the window and saw that the trees, etc., were completely still. I don't have the same phone, room, or roommate anymore, even though I still stay on campus. Story 16. I always remember this and do not have an explanation for it. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and walking to the stairs. I remember closing my eyes for a second at the top of the stairs, and when I opened them, I would be at the bottom of the stairs. I would run upstairs and close my eyes, and the same thing would happen again. It happened at least 4 to 5 times until my parents called me to go to bed because they could hear me run up the steps. It's weird because I was wide awake and do not have a history with sleepwalking. Still think about it and wonder how that was possible. He was probably just a very efficient 4-year-old. Why walk when you can quantum leap? Story 17. Posted this before, but thought it would fit here too. By my hometown, there was a hiking trail that people went to very infrequently. It was along the side of the Niagara Escarpment, so it had some climbable cliffs and some very shallow caves that you could crawl around on. I went with some friends when I was 19 or 20, and we were crawling around and found a cave that went pretty deep. We had never been in there before, had never even seen it before. So we pushed forward and decided to check it out even though we had no flashlights, and this was when cell phones didn't really have a flashlight function. We stepped into the cave and it was easily 20 to 30 degrees cooler than outside. Upon looking around with which light we had, we noticed it was really clean inside the cave, as in it didn't have beer cans littered everywhere like all the other small caves did. Well, in there we got a really eerie feeling after being in there shortly, hearing weird and strange things, feeling like we were being touched, poked, and pulled, and not having any way to figure out who was doing it because it was too dark. We were just using lighters to see what was around us. We were convinced one of us was messing with the others. Although, anytime we sparked up a lighter, we were all decently far apart. We decided to hightail it out of there after only a few minutes, convinced to come back with flashlights. We came out to see that it was now dusk outside. When we entered, it was midday. Somehow we had lost roughly 3 hours inside of this cave. We went back with flashlights the next week, but have never been able to find this cave again. Story 18. I was playing with our dog in the living room. At the time, I was around 9 years old. We're doing our usual only play like this when mom isn't home, else she'll tell us to stop type of playing. Basically playing fetch in the living room. At one point, I threw the toy, which caused it to ricochet out of the living room and into the kitchen. Franz, our dog's name, chased it and disappeared around the corner to get it. At that exact moment, the front door opened and mom walked in with Franz on a leash after a 2-hour walk over the beach and dunes. I tried to explain, but couldn't. I played with him for at least 15 minutes, apparently. My imagination, but I just don't believe that. Story 19. Sleep paralysis. A few years ago, I was dreaming I was talking to a friend of mine. So far, nothing weird. But then for some reason, I realized that I was in a dream and the person I was talking with technically wasn't my friend. Suddenly, their appearance turned to black and I felt them pushing me down and holding me down in my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. At this point, my cat woke up and jumped on me as if to protect me. Then the dark silhouette or whatever that thing was vanished and I woke up. I swear I had red marks on my shoulders where that thing was holding me down in my dream. Story 20. I work in hospice and spend a lot of time around dying people. About a month and a half ago, one of my long-term clients was actively passing. That can involve hallucinating, seeing and talking to people who aren't there. Happens a lot. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the person's brain trying to grasp their new reality. So I work overnights. My client was wide awake, talking to people who were in the room with her but who weren't in the room with me, which is fine. I'm okay with that. Until she started describing people I knew who had passed. I almost quit my job that night and told myself I wouldn't return to her. Most of the rest of her hospice care team started quitting in the next few days and I ended up staying with her until the end. That one weird night was the only time she was talking to my past family members. I'm still kind of messed up over it. Story 21. I'm not really a supernatural person at all. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I can explain anything creepy that happens when I'm alone, usually, or anything that just generally creepy happens. But as you could have guessed from that lead up in this question, there's one thing I still don't have an explanation for that I still think about. This happened around 5 years ago now, and I was still in high school. My sister and I were both walking up, and to get to the school, we have to walk down a small dirt path that runs right next to a cemetery. Usually, it's only us two using the path at the time in the morning. Sometimes you'll see someone walking a dog, but not often. We were walking down the path one morning when my sister said she thought she could hear someone following us. We checked behind us and no one was there, but if I listened, I could hear the clicking of high heels behind us as we talked. The sound followed us all the way off the path and stopped when we reached the main road and there were loads of people. We then heard it again when it was just us two alone walking in a back alley to get us to my sister's then boyfriend's house. Neither of us heard it for the rest of the day after we joined up with her boyfriend, but for the rest of the time at school, we both avoided using that path. We checked our bags to see if there was anything there that could make that sort of sound, but we both just had books in there. This isn't that creepy, all truth be told, but it's definitely had me thinking about things since it happened. Most of the time, it's just easier to ignore it for my own sanity, though. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 22. I constantly had dreams of a red-haired kid in my dad's childhood home. It was my paternal grandparents and all my dad's sisters who lived there that never had this ghost. No one believed me when I talked about this kid. He began to play in the bathroom with me because he loved to play in water in my dreams and it was downstairs so the adults wouldn't hear the water running. We moved out, thinking this imaginary friend was a scream for help or that. To my very suspicious parents, a ghost was contacting me. I recall an incident where I woke up in the bathtub with the water running one night and moving out 3 days later. My dad's cousins moved in and their children also talked about it. Mystery ginger kid with blue overalls and green shirt. Socks only and horribly stained throughout. I'd never met these kids before at that point, but I instantly loved them for backing up my story of the ghost kid. To the rest of the family, I was being mean because I was no longer the only child. The weird part was that the kid inhabited the kitchen. He inhabited the bathroom and backyard of my dreams and constantly asked for food, whereas he only liked to splash water in my mind. My dad's cousins had the house blessed by the local priest when in the mornings, 1 or 2 of the 5 kids would be seen covered in food stains or asleep on the kitchen floor surrounded by half-eaten food. A therapist explained it as a shared psychosis, but it doesn't explain my own version of the kid and his fascination with food for the other children. Story 23. Okay, this was recent and it still freaks me out. I was playing VR chat with my HTC Vive. I was sitting in my chair and just talking with friends when I all of a sudden heard something fall down or like someone tripped over something. Just some rumbling noise. I got confused because I was alone at home, so I lifted up my VR glasses and looked around in my room. I thought maybe something just simply fell down, but I couldn't find anything that looked different. Then all of a sudden I saw a chocolate bar wrapping on the floor, perfectly neatly placed right in front of me and with the front even facing me. Obviously I got confused and picked it up and looked at it, but the chocolate was missing. It was just the wrapping. But the problem is, I never bought this chocolate, nor did I eat it, nor did I even have this kind of chocolate. It was normal chocolate with nuts and grapes, and I'm not keen on those. And all said, it was just laying there. I never found out how it got there, and I never found out what the noise was I heard. I'm still so confused and almost a bit scared by it. Story 24. So I'm an atheist, but I can fully explain this one. I have a big family, like really big. Last count, I had around 20 cousins. One day we were all hanging out in the family farm and decided to spend the night. We just did girls in a room and boys in another, and everything was going fine. It was around 4 a.m. when I woke up to one of my cousins standing by the door. The hallway light was on and shining in my face, so I could only see his outline, but I knew it was Josh. I asked him what he was doing and if he needed something, but he didn't move. My eyes were starting to adjust. I could see more details, but I couldn't see his face. I was really sleepy and confused. When the hallway light, Josh's shape, everything disappeared. It was just darkness and an open door. I knew I was awake because I was sitting down. I decided to get one of my roommate's cousins up and go check on the boys. Josh had an allergy to something. He didn't want to bother anyone, so he took a Benadryl and went to bed. When I checked on him, he wasn't breathing. We got my uncle up. He gave Josh some heavy-duty medication and we took him to a hospital. Everyone was fine. Josh told me he knew I was an insomniac, and while he was suffocating, unable to make a noise, he kept praying I couldn't sleep and decided to check on him. Story 25. I'm curious if anyone else has had this happen. Years ago, my then wife and I would run into the same woman everywhere we went. I mean, everywhere we went. This went on for about a year. Go to the grocery store, she would be there shopping. Starbucks, yep, sitting right behind us. Walking around the mall, she would pass us walking in the other direction. Movie theater, she'd be behind us in line getting popcorn. The creepiest encounter was while driving on the freeway. My wife looked at the car next to us and screamed. Yep, it was her. She was always alone, never talked to us, and always made eye contact. She had a very unique appearance. She was very tall, very thin, and had very tight skin on her face. It was so unusual that we joked that we were being studied by an alien. It was some serious glitch in the Matrix stuff. Maybe she was just really into his grocery shopping choices. Story 26. I've told this before, but about 7 years ago, I was at my mom's house. I live next door, and this white car pulled into the driveway. They weren't expecting anyone, so I assumed they were lost and needed directions and went to the door. A white woman in her 50s or 60s got out, along with a 9 or 10-year-old black girl. Surprised me because I expected the kid to stay in the car if they just needed directions. I opened the door and the woman kind of nudges the girl towards me, both with big smiles on their faces. I said, "Hi, what can I help you with?" She asked if I was Baggy Raccoon, and I said yes. She told me they went to a neighbor's house looking for me, and they pointed her to her house. They just kind of stared at me expectantly like I was supposed to know the girl and be happy to see her. When I didn't react, the woman told me they were here to see the dentist. No dentists here. Small ranch-style house in a fairly rural neighborhood. No dentists here. Not anywhere near us. The woman and the girl just kept smiling. They didn't look confused. They just kept saying, "Are you sure?" Finally, they left, and later I asked the neighbor who directed them to our house, and she said she never told the woman my name, that the woman asked for me specifically. It's always kind of haunted me. I really feel like I was supposed to know that girl. Like, if I was a guy, this would be someone trying to introduce me to a kid who I didn't know I had. I honestly started wondering if I was crazy and had given up a child for adoption. It was that strange of a feeling. My mom firmly believes the girl will come back someday to tell me what it was about, and I think about it frequently. It drives me insane to wonder what they really wanted. Story 27. I have a lot of really weird experiences in my life that made me question reality, but this is my most recent weirdness. My mother passed away a year and a half ago. My stepdad couldn't handle it, so he packed up and left their house. He let the mortgage company take it back, and it has sat empty since he passed. The house is on a hill, and they have a huge barn in the field below the house, an acre away. A few weeks ago, my sister who lives down the road from the house called me and told me the lights were on in my mom's bedroom and all the barn lights were on. Hours passed, and her husband decided to go up the hill to the house. He walked in the door and walked to the light switch to shut off the lights to the barn. He switched the barn lights off, and all the lights went off. The inside and outside lights just shut off at the same time. He freaked a little bit and switched it back on, but there was nothing. No lights, no power, no anything. He turns around and leaves as fast as he can. The power had been off for over a year at that point. We assumed the mortgage company had turned on the power at first, but they haven't. The service is still off. There were probably 12 lights running on that phantom power. Story 28. It was a year ago, when I was about 17. I'd gone home from school and wasn't feeling well, so I spent the rest of the day just laying on the couch. By about 8 p.m., I was feeling even worse and decided I should just try to sleep. Whatever it is, so I went to my room and got in bed and passed out pretty quickly. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I suddenly woke up in my pitch-black bedroom and all I could think was, I'm going to pass away right now. My body was so weak. The room was spinning and my body felt like it was on fire. I looked over to the edge of my bed and sitting on the edge is my grandmother, who passed away just a few months ago. She pats my arm and says, "It's going to be okay. Just call for your dad. Try it. Call for your dad." So I started calling for him and it felt like an eternity, but he finally burst through my door and asked what's wrong. I look over and my grandma's gone. After that, he gets me up and takes me to the ER where I have a fever of 106 Fahrenheit, which explains a lot. I had to get a ton of fluids and a shot in my hip, but I eventually felt okay-ish. Her being there felt so real. It was so weird. I know logically she wasn't, but it felt so real. That sort of messed with me a little. I loved her dearly and her passing was very sudden. We kept her ashes in a nice urn in the house under a painting she had done herself. When I got home and passed by, I said thanks to her. I know it was the fever melting my brain and maybe some sleep paralysis, but it still made me question the afterlife and those sorts of things. Story 29. I once took a nap at my boyfriend's house and fell into a deep sleep. His best friend passed away 2 years ago. We'll call him Jay. And I never got the chance to meet him. I only know stories that my boyfriend tells me. I began dreaming. I dreamt I woke up from a nap and walked around the house to find my boyfriend. I kept running into people I know, and each time I would say, "I'm sleeping right now, I need to wake up." For about 2 hours, I walked around trying to convince everyone this wasn't reality and that this was actually a dream. Then I met Jay. He was in the dream, but he wasn't. I could tell he was the only other real entity and everything else was part of the dream. I said, "Hello, I'm so-and-so." He said, "I know." And then I said, "So you're Jay?" And he nodded. At that moment, we both knew we were meeting for the first time. We just looked at each other and knew. Then I woke up. I told my boyfriend I think I just met Jay and described the dream. He then explained to me that Jay was really into lucid dreaming and would study it and try to train himself to lucid dream or take something and try to dream. The whole experience was really crazy, but I'm convinced I was in a different dimension and met his deceased best friend. Story 30. I saw a shadow person. I've told this story before on other threads, but when I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. It was a pretty old building in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, and according to his dad, it used to be owned by Al Capone, but I'm not sure how true that was. We had an apartment in the top floor that they let us use just to hang out, and it allowed us easy access to the roof so we could go smoke cigarettes. One night we were about to go up, but I had to whiz, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went up the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. We had those flip phones without lights, so you only had a light from the screen to help navigate the cluttered mess that was up there. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. Now, this wasn't like the shadow of something moving with the light of my phone. This shadow felt solid, like a person. I followed the direction it went, thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times, before heading to the other side of the attic, and that's when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. I had no idea what the shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out and told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there. Story 31. When I was 12 or so and still living at my parents' house, I woke up in the middle of the night to pee. I got to the bathroom and heard what sounded like a party going on downstairs. Laughter, music, the sound of glasses being knocked together for a toast, the whole shebang. I thought it was weird that my parents had friends over so late and hadn't told me, but I decided to go and see who was there. Opened the door to the kitchen and the entire downstairs was completely dark and silent, not even a TV on. I was thoroughly confused, but the strangeness of the situation didn't really register, so I never told anyone. Years and years later, I mentioned this to my dad, and he said he had heard them too. Turns out there used to be a small public bar in their home, which is over 150 years old. I guess some of the patrons decided to hang out for eternity. Story 32. One day during the late summer or early fall a few years ago, I was walking home from my then-girlfriend's house. She lived maybe a 2-minute walk away from me, just around the corner. It was around 10 to 10:30 p.m. and completely dark out, and heard this weird screeching noise and thought it was coming from someone's garage because it was super faint. As I got closer to my house, like almost right across the street from my house, I saw what I thought was another leaf rustling around on the ground. Then I noticed it was going in a tight circular motion, almost like when you see a mini tornado occur, except this looked like just one singular leaf and was stuck to the ground. I got closer and noticed that's what was making the screeching noise. And since there weren't any streetlights near the driveway it was on, I was on the sidewalk, I decided to turn my flashlight from my phone on. Turns out it was a small mouse, not a leaf. I was so freaked out and confused as to why it would just be going in circles over and over again for such a long period of time. I remember trying to record it with a flash on to show my girlfriend, but it was barely visible on my phone, so I just told her about it. I probably waited there for 5 minutes, just in shock and freaked the heck out, and this little mouse just kept going. One of the weirdest experiences I've had. Story 33. I've told this before, but when I was in college, my friend's group was rather big, 10 or so of us, and we always went to lunch together at the cafeteria across campus every day. Outside of the atrium, which we had to go through to get to the cafeteria, there are bushes running alongside the pathway, so we're walking to lunch in groups of 2. There were 4 or 5 in the first group and 4 of us, including me in the trailing group. The first group walks between the bushes and keeps going, but as soon as my group walks between the bushes, we all kind of just stop. The most uneasy feeling just freaking washes into me, and I'm a bit disoriented. The other guys felt it too, then it kind of hits us all at once that something is missing. We can't remember who or anything about them. We do a count and we're all there, but we're all swearing there was one more person that's now just gone. We catch up to the first group and ask them, and they have no idea what we're talking about. It's one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me. I believe in the supernatural, but I take an incredibly skeptical view of it, but I can't explain that. Also, in that same area, a lamppost just appeared overnight one time. No one in the group could remember it being there, and we walked that way every single day. The group I was with when whoever it was disappeared took the long way around from then on out. I avoided that area like the plague. Story 34. My friend's mother and father passed away within a few months of each other when we were in our early 20s. While sitting in his living room, a mutual friend saw his past mother go from the bedroom towards the bathroom, which was down the living room. She casually stared at him and walked through the bathroom door. He noped out of the apartment and sat on the staircase for a few hours, waiting for me and the homeowner friend to get back from work. It was in the afternoon, and that guy's a teetotaler and was not under any influence. Sometimes did feel a presence around us, but that was the only sighting. Story 35. We had a cat when I was like 8 that got pregnant. The night she went into labor, my mom made a nest for her in the bathroom. The bathroom was just behind my bedroom, and it took all my self-control not to visit her during the night.
Instead, I stayed up, unable to sleep out of excitement, and read. At about midnight, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move by my doorway. I turned and looked directly at it and immediately got goosebumps. Passing by my doorway was a hooded figure with what looked like a sickle. I was too afraid to move or call for my mom, so after an hour or more, I fell asleep clutching my book. When I woke up in the morning, my mom told me the kittens were stillbirths. It's the strangest thing I've ever seen. I was not tired at all. I wasn't on anything. Being 8, lol. But I saw this figure that looked like Grimm pass my room. Very strange. Story 36. Probably easily explainable, but huge coincidence nonetheless. My paternal grandpa passed away out of nowhere 2 years ago in October. Every February, my dad has his birthday at a local bar in a small town where most of my family lives. This particular birthday was the first ever that my grandpa was not there with us. Halfway through the party, I noticed a jacket identical to his, thrown across the deep freezer by the door. Slowly, people started noticing it and mentioning it to each other. So I asked the bartender, who happens to be my second cousin on my dad's side. Turns out the jacket appeared 3 days before the party. Nobody knew who it was, nobody came to pick it up, and it even had a pack of cigarettes in the pocket. To this day, we all believe that Grandpa showed up for one last birthday party. Story 37. Ever since I was pretty young, maybe 6 or 7, and otherwise normal dreams where reality is pretty warped and the events really don't make sense, I would get these odd moments of pure reality where I would suddenly appear in a very normal environment that was typically completely unrelated to whatever I'd been dreaming about previously. It was like looking through a window. I could see everything through my eyes, but I couldn't physically control my movements. I was just along for the ride in my own head in the dream. When I was very young, I didn't really think it was that weird. I would very occasionally just instinctively know things like where my assigned seat would be for the new school year because that's where I was sitting in my dream. I remember this happening very distinctly when I was in middle school. I walked into my biology classroom and sat at my seat, and the scratches in the black lab table exactly correlated to what I had dreamed about a few months prior. It really freaked me out. These dreams started to taper off when I hit my teen years, and I haven't had one in at least 4 years or so. I've tried keeping a dream journal to see if I can verify my dreams against reality, but I always get bored of it and stop doing it in the end. The last one I remember having was me in an empty house getting on my hands and knees to look in the cabinet under the sink. I'm still waiting to see if this one will come true, or if I've just been crazy all these years. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.